Move on from Boris Johnson, Energy Secretary Grant Shapps has said, dismissing claims the ex-PM was the victim of a witch hunt. Mr Johnson resigned as an MP, saying he had been forced out by a kangaroo court of MPs investigating Partygate. Speaking on Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, Mr Shapps said it was Mr Johnson's own decision to stand down. He also denied reports Rishi Sunak's team prevented Mr Johnson handing out honours to key allies. Mr Johnson dramatically stood down from Parliament just hours after Downing Street published his resignation honours list, without the names of key allies including Nadine Dorries, Sir Alok Sharma and Nigel Adams. All three had been expected to be appointed to the House of Lords, the BBC has been told. Competing claims about how and why the names were removed are now at the heart of a rift within the Tory party following the former PM's resignation. A source familiar with the process has told the BBC that Mr Sunak's political team removed some of Mr Johnson's suggestions months ago. Asked if rumours were true that Mr Sunak's team had removed the names, Mr Shapps said no. The Prime Minister has exactly followed the very long-standing conversations and conventions over honours, Mr Shapps said. The House of Lords Appointments Commission, HOLAC, the official body for checking and vetting new peers, has confirmed it rejected 8 of Mr Johnson's nominations on the grounds of propriety. Pressed on whether Mr Sunak's team had taken names off the list months before the nominations were sent to HOLAC, Mr Shapps said, "As far as I'm aware, that is not true. The spat might look grubby from the outside, but some of Mr Johnson's allies have no desire to let this lie." Within 24 hours of the list being published, both Ms Dorries and Mr Adams resigned as MPs, triggering by-elections in their constituencies, both of which are considered safe seats for the Conservatives. Mr Johnson's resignation also triggers a by-election in his marginal constituency of Uxbridge and South Ruislip. This hat-trick of by-elections has the potential to create major problems for Mr Sunak at a time when the Conservatives are trailing Labour by an average of 15 points in national polls. Pressed on whether Mr Johnson had been the victim of a witch hunt, Mr Shapps said, "I don't think that's true. Boris Johnson himself has decided to step down. That is his own decision. People don't miss the drama of Mr Johnson's time in office," Mr Shapps added. Mr Johnson announced he was leaving Parliament a day after seeing advance a report of the findings of the Commons Privileges Committee investigating into whether he misled the Commons over Partygate. In an explosive and lengthy statement, he called the committee a kangaroo court, whose purpose has been to find me guilty, regardless of the facts. In a written statement, Mr Johnson said the draft report from the committee was riddled with inaccuracies and reeks of prejudice. He said the committee was determined to use proceedings against me to drive me out of Parliament. Asked about Mr Johnson's comments, Mr Shapps said, "I haven't seen what they've written, but I have no particular reason to think that is the case." Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy said the fallout from Mr Johnson's resignation shows there should be a general election. Speaking on Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, Mr Lammy said, "We have a former Prime Minister crafting a letter undermining the sitting Prime Minister, and we've got 3 by-elections brought about not in the unusual way because an MP has passed away or there has been any wrongdoing, but simply because these MPs want to put pressure on the current government. I don't say this with any glee, I say it because I genuinely believe in the interests of this country. We need certainty." Boris Johnson has stepped down as a Tory MP after claiming he was forced out of Parliament over Partygate. The ex-Prime Minister saw in advance a report by the Commons Privileges Committee investigating if he misled the Commons over Downing Street lockdown parties. In an explosive and lengthy statement, he called the committee a kangaroo court, whose purpose has been to find me guilty, regardless of the facts. The committee said it had followed the procedures and the mandate. The cross-party committee of MPs, the majority of which are Conservative, added it would conclude its inquiry on Monday and publish its report promptly. Mr Johnson's resignation now triggers a by-election in his marginal constituency of Uxbridge and South Ruislip. Delivering his announcement late on Friday evening, Mr Johnson said the draft report he had seen was riddled with inaccuracies and reeks of prejudice, adding it was clear the committee was determined to use the proceedings against me to drive me out of Parliament. They have still not produced a shred of evidence that I knowingly or recklessly misled the Commons, he said, insisting I did not lie. He also accused its chairwoman, Labour's Harriet Harman, of egregious bias, saying he was bewildered and appalled at how he was being forced out. The ex-Prime Minister previously admitted misleading Parliament when he gave evidence to the committee in a combative hearing in March, but denied doing it on purpose. He said social distancing had not been perfect at gatherings in Downing Street during COVID lockdowns, but insisted the guidelines as he understood them were followed at all times. Mr Johnson also used his letter to attack the direction of the government, saying we must not be afraid to be properly conservative, and warning the party's majority was at risk. We need to show how we are making the most of Brexit, and we need in the next months to be setting out a pro-growth and pro-investment agenda, Mr Johnson argued. Why have we so passively abandoned the prospect of a free trade deal with the US? Why have we junked measures to help people into housing, or to scrap EU directives, or to promote animal welfare? It was a direct aim at Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, hours after he stepped off a plane from Washington, where Mr Sunak was not talking about a free trade agreement with the US. And Mr Johnson's statement was an attempt to rally Brexiteers in his party, suggesting his demise was driven by a motivation to reverse the 2016 referendum result. The statement contained further criticism of former senior civil servant Sue Gray, who investigated lockdown gatherings at Number 10. I am afraid I no longer believe that it is any coincidence that she will soon become Chief of Staff designate of the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, Mr Johnson wrote. Ending his 1,000-word letter, Mr Johnson said he was very sad to be leaving Parliament, before adding, at least for now, for anyone thinking he is about to retreat into obscurity. Mr Johnson's exit will trigger a by-election in his West London seat, which he held with a 7,000 vote majority in the 2019 election. The Conservatives will also have to defend the Mid-Bedfordshire seat of Nadine Dorries, a close ally of Mr Johnson, after she stepped down as an MP earlier on Friday. Mr Johnson's dramatic move came after he was given the committee's findings, including details of criticisms it intended to make and evidence to support its conclusion. He had faced a potential by-election if MPs recommended a suspension from the Commons as a punishment for misleading Parliament. Responding to his statement, a Privileges Committee spokesperson said, "The committee has followed the procedures and the mandate of the House at all times and will continue to do so. Mr Johnson has departed from the processes of the House and has impugned the integrity of the House by his statement. The committee will meet on Monday to conclude the inquiry and to publish its report promptly." Elsewhere, Labour Deputy Leader Angela Rayner condemned what she called a never-ending Tory soap opera. For the Liberal Democrats, Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper said good riddance, and SNP Deputy Westminster Leader Maury Black said Mr Johnson jumped before he was pushed, adding no one in Scotland will be sorry to see the back of him. However, former Home Secretary Priti Patel, who was made a dame in his resignation honours list, also announced on Friday, praised Mr Johnson for his work as Prime Minister on the issues of Ukraine and Brexit, describing him as a political titan. Boris Johnson's local Conservative Association chairman, Richard Mills, said the former PM has delivered on his promises to local residents. Another sitting MP announced in the resignation honours list, Sir Michael Fabricant, criticised the Privileges Committee for what he called its disgraceful treatment of the former Prime Minister. Mr Johnson was Prime Minister from July 2019 until September 2022 and has been an MP since 2001, although not continuously, having served as Mayor of London between 2008 and 2016. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced that he is standing down as an MP with immediate effect. It comes after he received a report from the MP-led Privileges Committee into whether he misled Parliament over lockdown parties at Downing Street. Here is his full statement. "I have received a letter from the Privileges Committee making it clear, much to my amazement, that they are determined to use the proceedings against me to drive me out of Parliament. They have still not produced a shred of evidence that I knowingly or recklessly misled the Commons. They know perfectly well that when I spoke in the Commons, I was saying what I believed sincerely to be true and what I had been briefed to say, like any other minister. They know that I corrected the record as soon as possible, and they know that I and every other senior official and minister, including the current Prime Minister and then occupant of the same building, Rishi Sunak, believed that we were working lawfully together. I have been an MP since 2001. I take my responsibilities seriously. I did not lie, and I believe that in their hearts the committee know it, but they have willfully chosen to ignore the truth, because from the outset their purpose has not been to discover the truth, or generally to understand what was in my mind when I spoke in the Commons. Their purpose from the beginning has been to find me guilty, regardless of the facts. This is the very definition of a kangaroo court. Most members of the committee, especially the chair, had already expressed deeply prejudicial remarks about my guilt before they had even seen the evidence. They should have recused themselves. In retrospect, it was naive and trusting of me to think that these proceedings could be remotely useful or fair, but I was determined to believe in the system and in justice, and to vindicate what I knew to be the truth. It was the same faith in the impartiality of our systems that led me to commission Sue Gray. It is clear that my faith has been misplaced. Of course, it suits the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats and the SNP to do whatever they can to remove me from Parliament. Sadly, as we saw in July last year, there are currently some Tory MPs who share that view. I am not alone in thinking that there is a witch hunt underway, to take revenge for Brexit and ultimately to reverse the 2016 referendum results. My removal is the necessary first step, and I believe there has been a concerted attempt to bring it about. I am afraid I no longer believe that it is any coincidence that Sue Gray, who investigated gatherings in Number 10, is now the Chief of Staff designate of the Labour leader, nor do I believe that it is any coincidence that her supposedly impartial Chief Counsel, Daniel Stillitz, KC, turned out to be a strong Labour supporter who repeatedly tweeted personal attacks on me and the government. When I left office last year, the government was only a handful of points behind in the polls. That gap has now massively widened. Just a few years after winning the biggest majority in almost half a century, that majority is now clearly at risk. Our party needs urgently to recapture its sense of momentum and its belief in what this country can do. We need to show how we are making the most of Brexit, and we need in the next months to be setting out a pro-growth and pro-investment agenda. We need to cut business and personal taxes, and not just as pre-election gimmicks, rather than endlessly putting them up. We must not be afraid to be a proper Conservative party and government. Why have we so passively abandoned the prospect of a free trade deal with the US? Why have we junked measures to help protect people in housing, or to scrap EU directives, or to promote animal welfare? We need to deliver on the 2019 manifesto, which was endorsed by 14 million people. We should remember that more than 17 million voted for Brexit. I'm now being forced out of Parliament by a tiny handful of people with no evidence to back up their assertions, and without the approval even of Conservative Party members, let alone the wider electorate. I believe that a dangerous and unsettling precedent is being set. The Conservative Party has the time to recover its mojo and its ambition and to win the next election. I had looked forward to providing enthusiastic support as a backbench MP. Harriet Harman's committee has set out to make that objective completely untenable. The committee's report is riddled with inaccuracies and reeks of prejudice, but under their absurd and unjust process, I have no formal ability to challenge anything they say. The Privileges Committee is there to protect the privileges of Parliament. That is a very important job. They should not be using their powers, which have only been recently designed, to mount what is plainly a political hit job on someone they oppose. It is in no one's interest, however, that the process the committee has launched should continue for a single day further. So I have today written to my association in Uxbridge and South Ruislip to say that I'm stepping down forthwith and triggering an immediate by-election. I'm very sorry to leave my wonderful constituency. It has been a huge honour to serve them, both as Mayor and MP. But I am proud that after what is cumulatively a 15-year stint, I have helped to deliver, among other things, a vast new railway in the Elizabeth line and full funding for a wonderful new state-of-the-art hospital for Hillingdon, where enabling works have already begun. I also remain hugely proud of all that we have achieved in my time in office as Prime Minister. Getting Brexit done, winning the biggest majority for 40 years, and delivering the fastest vaccine rollout of any major European country, as well as leading global support for Ukraine. It is very sad to be leaving Parliament, at least for now, but above all I am bewildered and appalled that I can be forced out. Anti-democratically by a committee chaired and managed by Harriet Harman with such egregious bias. Some of Boris Johnson's closest allies, including Priti Patel and Jacob Rees-Mogg, have been rewarded with peerages and other awards in the former PM's honours list. It was published hours before Mr Johnson stepped down as an MP. Former Secretaries of State Simon Clarke and Mr Rees-Mogg were knighted, while Miss Patel was made a dame. Tees Valley Mayor Ben Hoochin and London Assembly member Sean Bailey are among 7 new peers. No serving MPs were given peerages, avoiding by-elections for the Tories, but there will now be one in Mr Johnson's own constituency of Uxbridge and South Ruislip. Former Conservative Minister Nadine Dorries was not put forward for the House of Lords, despite speculation she would be on the published list. Miss Dorries, who served as Culture Secretary under Mr Johnson, stood down as an MP with immediate effect, just over an hour before the honours list was released. The resignation honours list is a tradition that gives outgoing Prime Ministers the opportunity to nominate people for honours. The long-awaited list, approved 9 months after Mr Johnson resigned as Prime Minister, included 38 honours and 7 peerages. Kulveer Singh Ranger, a former Director of Transport, while Mr Johnson was London Mayor, and former Downing Street Chief of Staff Dan Rosenfield are also among those who will enter the Lords. Charlotte Owen, a former advisor to Mr Johnson, will become one of the youngest peers, as will fellow advisors Ben Gascoigne and Ross Kempsell. Honours were handed out to some of Mr Johnson's closest advisors during his premiership, including former Directors of Communications Jack Doyle and Guto Harry, who were both made CBEs. Also among recipients were aides who served with Mr Johnson during the scandal over lockdown parties in Downing Street during the COVID-19 pandemic. Martin Reynolds, Mr Johnson's former Principal Private Secretary, was awarded the Order of Bath. In May 2020, Mr Reynolds sent an invite to a Bring Your Own Booze party to Downing Street staff when the nation was under lockdown. Ben Elliott, the former co-chair of the Conservative Party, has also been awarded a knighthood, as have Tory MPs Michael Fabricant and Conor Burns, 2 of Mr Johnson's loyalists. The first name on the list was Tory MP and long-standing Brexit backer Bill Cash, who has become a Companion of Honour. Membership is a special award granted to those who have made a major contribution to the arts, science, medicine or government, and it is only held by up to 65 people at any one time. Rishi Sunak has approved Mr Johnson's resignation honours list and forwarded it unamended to King Charles, the Prime Minister's press secretary said. He had no involvement or input into the approved list, the press secretary said. By convention, a former Prime Minister's resignation list of new peers is forwarded to the House of Lords Appointments Commission, HOLAC, which vets appointments. Another Tory MP who did not feature on the list, despite being widely tipped for a peerage, was Alok Sharma, who was president of the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow. Usually when sitting MPs are given peerages, they resign their seats, triggering by-elections. Following the Partygate scandal and the political turbulence of Mr Johnson's premiership, the former PM's honours list was always expected to be controversial and to provoke fierce criticism. Some of the reaction to the names published on Friday have been met with those expectations. A formerly loyal aide to Mr Johnson branded the honours list an utter disgrace, telling the BBC it was rewards for failure all round. They said Boris has slammed the door shut on the prospect of any return to the front line of British politics and trashed what remained of his legacy. Labour's deputy leader Angela Rayner said it was shameful that Mr Sunak had failed to stand up to his former boss's outrageous demands and agreed to hand out prizes to this carousel of cronies. He promised integrity, but this week Prime Minister is once again showing his appalling judgment by doing Boris Johnson's bidding, Miss Rayner said. And Liberal Democrat Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper said that Boris Johnson has been allowed to hand out gongs to his Partygate pals, and Rishi Sunak has just waved it through. The 7 new peers on Mr Johnson's honours list will enter a House of Lords that already has more than 800 members. The Electoral Reform Society campaign group said Mr Johnson's resignation list demonstrates just how discredited and partisan the honours system has become. It's time to end this rotten system of patronage and replace the unelected Lords with a smaller elected chamber, where the people of this country, not former Prime Ministers, choose who shape the laws we all live under, its Chief Executive Darren Hughes said. Boris Johnson is loyal to those who are loyal to him, and his resignation honours list underlines this, until the ink runs out. Almost all of the 45 names know him personally. Many worked for him either at Number 10 or when he was London Mayor. Even his current spokesman has been transformed into a legislator with a seat in the House of Lords. And for anyone who assumed that meritocracy might play a part in the honour system, a long-standing parliamentary hairdresser, Kelly Dodge, gets a gong for doing Mr Johnson's hair. Yes, you read that correctly, Mr. Johnson's mop. But just as Mr. Johnson rewards loyalty, he has more subtly made clear disloyalty comes at a price. He must know that a list strewn with reminders of the Partygate era will make the current PM uncomfortable. The list is crammed with dames and knighthoods for some of Mr. Johnson's defenders in the Parliamentary Party, but there are plenty of Conservative detractors, those who describe the list as ghastly or full of sycophants. For them, the list has damaged their party specifically and trust in politics more generally, but it also allows the opposition to portray Rishi Sunak as weak for not blocking the list. Convention suggests Prime Ministers don't veto their predecessors' honours, but Mr. Johnson was a very unconventional occupant of number 10. Three British tourists are missing after a fire on board a boat during a sea cruise in the Egyptian Red Sea. 24 other people, including 12 Britons, were rescued from the boat called Hurricane, which was off the coast of Marsa Alam, authorities said. They added that initial reports suggested the fire at 6:30 AM local time was down to an electrical fault. The boat has been used on a diving cruise and had left Port Galib on the 6th of June and had been due to return on Sunday. Local authorities said 15 British passengers have been on board along with 10 crew members and 2 guides. The Red Sea Governorate said initial examinations had found an electrical short circuit in the engine room, while the Public Prosecution Office had begun an investigation. All of those involved have been rescued were said to be well. The boat Hurricane is one of several operated by Tornado Marine Fleet. A spokesman said the fire happened while crew were doing the diving briefing at Elphinstone Reef, a diving destination known for its wealth of marine life, including colourful corals and sharks. The Red Sea is a popular resort for diving trips. This is really bad news for the tourism industry, said BBC News correspondent Sally Nabil. They depend on tourism, particularly British tourism. The Foreign Office said it was supporting British nationals involved. A spokesman said we are in contact with local authorities following an incident aboard a dive boat near Marsa Alam and are supporting British nationals involved. Eight teenagers have been arrested on suspicion of murder after the fatal stabbing of a 16-year-old boy. Emergency services were called to an address on Eastfield Avenue in Bath, Somerset, shortly after 11 PM on Saturday. The 6 boys and 2 girls were being held are aged between 15 and 17. Avon and Somerset police said the 8 teenagers were arrested on a bus travelling on Lansdowne Lane at 11:30 PM and remain in police custody. A 35-year-old woman was also stabbed, but has been discharged from hospital, the force added. Members of the public provided the boy with first aid before paramedics arrived, but he died at the scene. Chief Inspector Ronald Longu of the Bath Neighbourhood Team said, "This is a tragic incident and our thoughts this morning are very much with the family of the boy who has died." Officers arrived at the scene within minutes of the first call being received and a murder investigation is being carried out. He added the boy's family has been informed and were understandably devastated. A post-mortem examination to determine the cause of the boy's death will take place in due course, police said. There is a large cordon in place on Eastfield Avenue while police carry out their investigation. We've identified a number of witnesses and will be taking formal statements from them in due course, added Chief Inspector Longu. The community can expect to see a significant police presence in the area for the next few days, while officers and police staff carry out a number of actions, including forensic examinations, a review of CCTV footage, and house-to-house inquiries. Russia appears to have moved to take direct control of Wagner after months of infighting between defense officials and the private military group. Deputy Defence Minister Nikolai Pankov said on Saturday volunteer formations will be asked to sign contracts directly with the Ministry of Defence. The vaguely worded statement is widely believed to target the group, but in a furious statement on Sunday, Wagner boss Evgeny Prigozhin said his forces would boycott the contracts. The private military group has played a major role in the war in Ukraine, fighting on the side of Russian forces, but Prigozhin, who is said to hold political ambitions of his own, has been embroiled in a public dispute with Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu and military chief Valery Gerasimov for months. He has repeatedly accused the pair of incompetence and of deliberately undersupplying Wagner units fighting in Ukraine. Wagner will not sign any contracts with Shoigu, Prigozhin said in response to a request for comment on the Defence Ministry's announcement. Shoigu cannot properly manage military formation. He insisted that his group was well integrated with the Russian military, but said that its effectiveness would be damaged by having to report to the defence minister. While Saturday's announcements did not directly reference Wagner or any other paramilitary groups, Russian media suggested that the new contracts were a move to bring Prigozhin and his forces under control. But the Defence Ministry said the move was designed to increase the effectiveness of Russian units fighting in Ukraine. This will give volunteer formations the necessary legal status, create common approaches to the organisation of comprehensive support and the fulfilment of their tasks, the ministry said in a statement, adding that the contracts must be signed by the 1st of July. The long-running tensions between the Wagner Group and the army have threatened to boil over in recent weeks. Last week, the group kidnapped a senior frontline army commander, Lieutenant Colonel Roman Venetvin, after accusing him of opening fire on a Wagner vehicle near Bakhmut. Lieutenant Colonel Venetvin was later released, and in a video shared by Russian military bloggers, he accused the group of stoking anarchy on Russia's front lines by stealing arms, forcing mobilized soldiers to sign contracts with the group, and attempting to extort weapons from the Defence Ministry. Prigozhin called the comments, which appeared to be read from a script, absolutely total nonsense. He also suggested that he is ready to deploy his troops on Russian soil, saying on Telegram that Wagner was ready to fight against insurrectionist forces in the Belgorod region. In December, the US estimated that Wagner had around 50,000 troops fighting in Ukraine, and the mercenary group has increasingly become a tool of Russian state power around the world. Its troops are currently believed to have been deployed in Mali, the Central African Republic, Sudan and Libya. The size of the flooded area in the Kherson region as a result of the Khatkiv dam breach has almost halved, Ukraine says, but experts and officials fear infectious diseases may spread in polluted waters. Water levels have dropped by 27 centimeters or 10 inches, the regional administration's head Alexander Prokhodin said, but thousands of Ukrainian homes remain flooded, the Interior Ministry said. Tens of thousands of people have lost access to drinking water. The major dam burst on Tuesday, releasing a huge torrent of water, which quickly flooded vast areas of land on both sides of the Dnipro River. Ukraine has blamed Russia for blowing up the dam, located in a Russian-controlled area of Ukraine. Russia has denied this and has accused Ukraine of being responsible for its destruction. The BBC has not verified either claim, although it seems likely that Russian forces who control the dam decided to blow it up in order to complicate Ukraine's ongoing counteroffensive. Behind the dam, the huge Kharkov reservoir, a vital source of water for the region, has drained of water. The World Health Organization, whose Ukraine representative, Dr. Jano Habit, told the BBC the situation was devastating and providing safe, clean water was a priority. He said it was important to keep an eye on waterborne illnesses and that precautionary sample testing was ongoing. The UK's Defence Ministry said people were facing a sanitisation crisis with limited access to safe water and an increased risk of waterborne diseases. While Ukrainian officials said no cases of infectious diseases and illness have been reported so far, the city of Kherson, around 100 kilometres or 62 miles from the Kharkov dam and badly affected by the floods, has introduced restrictions on the use of river water in order to prevent their spread. The flooding of houses and sewage facilities means the water is now highly polluted. The city military administration said, meaning that bathing, fishing and drinking in the water or giving it to animals is prohibited. Ukraine's Interior Ministry said 32 settlements had been flooded in Ukrainian-controlled Kherson, while another 14 were flooded in the Russian-controlled part. Another 31 settlements were flooded in the Mykolaiv region. The destruction of the Kakhovka Dam has also likely led to the disruption of water supplies to Crimea, which was illegally annexed by Russia in 2014. The northern Crimean Canal draws its water supply from the Kakhovka reservoir located between and behind the now destroyed dam. Ukraine hydro energy company Hydroenergo said the water level in the reservoir had fallen by more than 7 metres or 23 feet, and on Sunday the UK Defence Ministry warned that water will soon stop flowing to the peninsula. Drone footage filmed after the dam breach appears to show significantly reduced water levels near the entrance to the canal. Whoever was responsible for the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam will have done so knowing that it would deprive Crimea of badly needed fresh water. The canal was blocked by Ukraine following the annexation of Crimea in 2014, but Russia quickly unblocked it after it invaded southern Ukraine last year. Russian commanders may have concluded that rendering the waterway useless again by blowing up the dam might have seemed like a necessary, if extreme, price to pay for complicating Ukraine's military plans. Earlier, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed that his country's long-awaited counter-offensive against Russia has started. Counter-offensive and defensive actions are taking place, he said on Saturday. Ukrainian troops are reported to have advanced in the east near Bakhmut and in the south near Zaporizhzhia and have carried out long-range strikes on Russian targets. Assessing the reality of the situation on the front lines is difficult. The respected US-based think tank Institute for the Study of War says that while Ukrainian forces appear to have made some localized gains, they have struggled to break through dug-in Russian positions. Meanwhile, in Russia's Belgorod region, bordering Ukraine, rail traffic was suspended after a freight train derailed on Saturday night. Belgorod's border areas have been hit by drones, shelling and cross-border raids in the past weeks. Further north, the governor of the Kaluga region, Vladislav Shapsha, said there have been 2 drone crashes, one near the village of Stelkrov and the other in a forest. Dozens of migrants have been stranded for months on a tiny British territory in the Indian Ocean after being rescued from their struggling fishing boat. They are desperate to leave for a safe place, describing conditions as hellish, but the unusual legal status of the island has left them feeling frightened and helpless. Early one morning in October 2021, a fishing boat was spotted struggling near the island of Diego Garcia. The vessel immediately attracted the attention of the island's authorities. The territory hosts a secretive UK-US military base, hundreds of miles away from any other population, and unauthorized visitors are forbidden. It soon became clear that the 89 people on board, Sri Lankan Tamils, who said they were fleeing persecution, weren't actually intending to land on the island. They had planned to seek asylum in Canada, a claim backed up by maps, diary entries and GPS data on board, before rough weather and engine problems pulled them off course. As the boat ran into trouble, one man on board said they started looking for the nearest place of safety. "We saw a bit of light and started sailing towards Diego Garcia," he told the BBC. A Royal Navy ship escorted the boat to land and the group were put into temporary accommodation. That was 20 months ago, and communications between officials on the island and London gives clues as to why the migrants, some of whom have since attempted suicide due to their dire situation, are still there. Communications in the immediate aftermath of their arrival were obtained through a Freedom of Information request to the Foreign Office by a lawyer representing some of the migrants and shared with the BBC. They show officials wrestling with what to do about the unprecedented development. Early messages spoke of plans to investigate repair options to the engine, but said we can't rule out that the group will launch asylum claims from Diego Garcia. By the next day, that scenario had become a reality. The Tamils had presented a letter to the commander of the British forces on the island saying they were fleeing persecution, having set sail from Tamil Nadu in India 18 days earlier. and expressing a wish to be sent to a safe country. Many have since claimed to have links with former Tamil Tiger rebels in Sri Lanka, who were defeated in the civil war that ended in 2009, and say they have faced persecution as a result. Some allege they were victims of torture or sexual assault. An official information note approved in London by the Director of Overseas Territories, Paul Candler, said that the unexpected arrival of the group had marked the first time asylum had been sought on British Indian Ocean Territory, BIOT, the island's official name. It added that if approached by the media, the official defensive line would be that the UK government was aware of the incident and was working urgently to resolve the situation. The group currently has no means of communication with the outside world, but with time passing, there is a high likelihood news will spread, it added. In the coming months, as messages were going back and forth to London, more boats arrived on Diego Garcia. At one point, numbers in the camp swelled to at least 150, lawyers estimate, as others arrived on the island from Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, the reality of their current situation was beginning to dawn on the asylum seekers. I was initially happy, thinking, I survived, I'm getting food, and I am away from torture, Lakshani, one of the migrants, said last month. But she said that the tropical island refuge soon turned out to be a hell. She says she was sexually assaulted in October last year by a man who travelled in the same boat and was housed in the same tent as her. I started to scream, but no one came to help. When she felt able to make an official complaint, she says she was told it was difficult to gather evidence as she had washed her clothes. She says she had to continue staying in the same tent as her alleged attacker for almost a week until authorities finally responded to her demand to have him moved. The UK government and BIOT administration did not respond to requests for comment about this allegation. Lakshani and others said they or people they knew had attempted suicide or had self-harmed in their distress at the suffocating conditions, including by swapping sharp objects. Lawyers say they are aware of at least 12 suicide attempts and allegations of at least 2 sexual assaults within the camp. We are mentally and physically exhausted. We are living a lifeless life. I feel like I'm living like a dead man, said Vithishan, another migrant. He said that he had self-harmed twice. Another man, Adhavan, said that after his initial claim for protection was rejected, he lost all hope and decided to take his own life. I didn't want to live here like a caged animal forever. He told another migrant in the camp of his suicide attempt, and she alerted the camp authorities, who arranged medical treatment. Another woman, Shanti, said her husband had also attempted suicide. Lakshani said her own attempt to take her life had been provoked by an officer at the camp, telling her she would be sent back to Sri Lanka, where she alleges she was raped and tortured by soldiers in 2021. The UK government and G4S, the private secretary company brought in to guard the migrant camp, did not respond to requests for comment on this specific claim. G4S says its officers treated migrants on the island with dignity and respect at all times, while a UK government spokesperson said the welfare and safety of migrants on BIOT was paramount and that all allegations of mistreatment are taken seriously and fully investigated. The spokesperson added that the BIOT administration was providing extensive medical support. There have also been hunger strikes on the island, which lawyers say have involved children. In response to one earlier this year, lawyers say the BIOT commissioner confiscated migrants' phones, stopped access to the communal telephone and withdrew medical treatment unless the individuals were willing to sign a form disclaiming certain liabilities of the BIOT administration. The BIOT administration has dismissed this allegation in court documents, saying that in response to one hunger strike, sharp objects were removed from the camp and other measures taken to prevent self-harm. All can agree that the Diego Garcia military base was not a place intended to house asylum seekers. Britain took control of the Chagos Islands, of which Diego Garcia is part, from its then colony Mauritius in 1965, and went on to evict its population of more than 1,000 people to make way for the base. In recent decades, US planes have been sent from the base to bomb Afghanistan and Iraq, and it has also been reported that used as a so-called CIA black site, a facility used to house and interrogate terror suspects. Court documents filed in London say tents previously set up as COVID isolation facilities for military personnel are being used as a makeshift migrant camp. Fences surround the camp and inside there are basic medical facilities and a canteen. GFRS guards must accompany the migrants if they leave the area. "We are the parrots, we are in a cage," said Shanti of the lack of freedom. Lawyers representing the migrants say basic education became available about a year ago, but that classes have at times had to be held outside because of a rat infestation. Some migrants have since returned home, having either given up their claim or had it rejected. Others set sail for the Indian Ocean island of Reunion, a French territory, hoping to claim asylum there, the lawyers said. Currently, at least 60 Tamils remain on the island. They are awaiting decisions about their fate, or challenging earlier rulings in convoluted legal processes, playing out thousands of miles away in the UK. While the UK is signed up to international laws about the treatment of refugees, court papers say this doesn't apply to BIOT, an area described as being constitutionally distinct and separate from the UK. A separate process based on the idea that no one should be returned to a country where they face torture or inhumane treatment has been established to determine if they should be sent back to Sri Lanka or to a safe third country. Lawyer Tessa Gregory says the London firm she works for, Lee Day, has launched a judicial review on behalf of a number of asylum seekers on Diego Garcia, challenging the lawfulness of this process, which she describes as fundamentally unfair. She says decisions to return some migrants to Sri Lanka were made based on rushed initial interviews, while later fuller interviews were marred by translation errors. Others have been left in limbo as the UK government has not yet identified a suitable safe third country, she said. Meanwhile, the UK government said the BIOT administration was considering migrants' protection claims under BIOT law and in line with international legal obligations. The UK Office of the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, said it was concerned by reports of the deteriorating health situation under Diego Garcia and had requested access from UK authorities, but this had not yet been granted. Emily McDonnell, UK Advocacy and Communications Coordinator at Human Rights Watch, said the British government should consider any and all options to ensure the welfare of these asylum seekers who are on British-controlled territory and therefore should be protected by the British government. The UK has said it will not take in any of the Diego Garcia asylum seekers whose claims are approved according to lawyers. 3 of the Tamils who arrived on Diego Garcia are currently in Rwanda, receiving medical treatment after being evacuated from the island following self-harm and suicide attempts. Their transfer is not part of the deal struck by the British and Rwanda governments to send some asylum seekers from the UK to the East African country. In a letter sent to one of them in May, and seen by the BBC, the BIOT administration said it would find and pay for private accommodation while they received treatment in Rwanda, including therapy. If you are not content with the proposal, we can arrange for our return to Diego Garcia. There is no other option available at this time, it said. 4 of the asylum seekers have had their claims to be sent to a safe third country approved. A letter sent 2 months ago to one of them has been seen and says every effort will be made to do this expeditiously. In a separate statement to the BBC this week, the UK government said it was working tirelessly with the BIOT administration to find a long-term solution to the migrants' current situation. But the situation for everyone could continue to drag on with no clear timeframe for finding a safe third country and long legal processes for those disputing rejections. After 20 months of waiting, one asylum seeker said everyone seemed to have lost their hope. Firefighters are battling a wildfire that broke out in the Highlands for a second day. The flames burned through the night after taking hold near the village of Daviot, south of Inverness, at about 2:45 p.m. on Saturday. Some homes and businesses close to the fire area have been without power since Saturday as a result. The fire service said helicopter water bombing was still in operation on Sunday afternoon. However, it said crews were also dampening down hotspots. People have been urged to stay indoors and close all windows to prevent smoke inhalation. The blaze is about 30 miles or 48 kilometres from Cannock, the site of another recent wildfire, thought to have been the largest recorded in the UK. Locals in Daviot have praised crews who protected properties from the flames. One resident whose back garden was feet away from the blaze said to BBC Scotland that he chose to take his family away from the area for the night. He said the power was still out on Sunday morning. Thankfully it has started to rain now. The firefighters were brilliant. If they had been 5 minutes later, I think it could have been a different story. Power was also out at the nearby Auchnahillen Holiday Park on Sunday, where owner Anita Gibson had been monitoring the situation and taking advice from the fire service overnight. We are so close just underneath the hill, so the flames were not so visible for us, but there was a lot of smoke. The helicopter was going overhead and dropping water up until about 11 PM, so it was fairly noisy. I moved some of our tent campers into caravans for the night as I was worried about the smoke. She said the fire seemed like it was under control on the side of the hill, but was still burning into the moors. She added that the power is still off, but there was no damage to property, and we were glad to see a bit of rain this morning. We know wildfires do occur, but it's not something we thought would happen on our doorstep. We are very grateful to the emergency services. SFRS had extended an alert for a very high risk of wildfire until Monday. Saturday was the hottest day of the year for Scotland, after 29.8 centigrade was recorded in Auchterarder, Ayrshire. Duncan McPherson, a Highland councillor for Inverness South, said firefighters were facing an almighty challenge on Saturday night. He tweeted the wildfire at Daviot south of Inverness stretches over a mile long between Craggy and Moy and presents an almighty challenge for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to try and contain as the wind blows the flames further across the landscape. Scientist Dr. Gail Millen-Chalabi told BBC One's The Sunday Show wildfires had become more common in recent years. One of the things to bear in mind is we are seeing hotter, drier, longer summers in the UK, and this was predicted back in 2013 when wildfire was first identified as a risk in the UK, she said. We are seeing larger and more severe wildfires here. We had the largest number of burnt areas of 30 hectares or larger in 2022, with 151 in total for the wildfire season. She also said that most of the UK's wildfires were caused by accidental or deliberate ignition. We have evidence of that, and there is definitely a requirement to increase awareness of wildfire risk in peatland, moorland and heathlands. Meanwhile, thunderstorms are expected to sweep across much of the Highlands and West Coast on Sunday. Their Met Office has issued a yellow alert lasting between 12 and 9 PM. Forecasters said conditions would include lightning strikes, strong winds and torrential rain in some parts. Conversations about mortgage rates are no longer confined to the dinner party circuit or the golf course. People are talking about their mortgage shock with friends at the school gates or in the supermarket. It is not only anxious homeowners, tenants are worried their landlords, facing higher rates of their own, will put up their rents. Here are 5 reasons for the current issues. 1. Lenders have concerns about the rising cost of living. If forecasts were to be believed, we should be seeing a significant slowdown in price rises. The rate of inflation shows the pace at which prices are going up, and so charts the rising cost of living. The latest official data spooked markets and lenders, though, as it suggested inflation was going to stay higher for longer than anticipated. It also pointed to a theory that higher prices were becoming more embedded in the UK economy. The premier, if rather blunt, tool to tackle high inflation is for the Bank of England to put up interest rates, with the benchmark rate now expected to peak at 5.5% rather than the current 4.5%. The cost to lenders would be greater, and so in turn they have put up the interest rate they charge for mortgages. Mohamed El Iran, former Deputy Director of the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and President of Queen's College at Cambridge University, says the blame lies with central banks, who suggested high inflation would only be temporary. It turned out inflation was persistent, and therefore central banks were late and society as a whole was late to adjust to higher inflation. 2. The 2021 stamp duty frenzy is causing headaches now. 2 years ago there was a rush from property buyers as tax concessions from ministers to keep the housing market moving during COVID were wound down. Lower or zero rates on stamp duty and the equivalent tax in Scotland and Wales made a hot market even hotter, according to analysts. The pandemic led many people to reconsider where they lived, and stamp duty cuts made them move more quickly. Many of those buyers got 2-year fixed mortgages, which are now due to expire. The peak for home owners rolling off fixed mortgage deals is July to October this year, with more than 400,000 expected to do so, according to figures from the city watchdog, the Financial Conduct Authority. The timing isn't great. The rates being offered for a new deal now are considerably higher than back then. That could add hundreds of pounds to a monthly mortgage repayment. Anil and Jessica Jahmat from Solihull are having to find an extra £550 a month. They bought their home during the stamp duty holiday, which allowed them to purchase a house we wouldn't otherwise have been able to afford. We assumed interest rates would stay low, otherwise we'd have taken out a 5-year fix, Mr. Jahmat said. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. The pharmacist and his wife, a digital manager, also have to find £1,000 a month in childcare fees for their 1-year-old son. Where we are now, we've lost what we saved in stamp duty. Essentially, we're back to square one. 3. Lenders are pulling deals with little notice. A mortgage repayment is the highest monthly outgoing for many people, so decisions over which product to choose are made with lots of thought and advice. The trouble is, lenders are currently withdrawing their mortgage products with hardly any notice. That makes for a frenzied situation. Thursday, HSBC gave notice to brokers that it was going to pull its deals 4 hours later. After being inundated with applications, it withdrew them within 3 hours, only to then temporarily reopen the channel for applications on Friday. At times like this, big lenders do not want their deals to be significantly cheaper than their rivals, and they only want as many applications as they can cope with. Justin Moy, founder at Chelmsford-based mortgage broker EHF Mortgages, said these last-minute communications just add to the stress of the situation. Decisions on rate changes and repricing must give everyone the opportunity to react in a controlled manner, especially when the increases are hefty and make a real difference to a borrower. Number 4. The do-nothing option is expensive. Homeowners who decide the best thing to do is sit on their hands and wait for things to settle down could face a nasty shock. When a fixed term comes to an end, usually after 2 or 5 years, then a borrower reverts automatically to their lender's standard variable, SVR. That rate is higher, which is why most people go on to another fixed deal. Instead, although not everyone has that option, as for example, they may have missed payments in the past. Brokers say these SVRs have soared, meaning anyone who adopts a wait-and-see approach would see a massive jump in the rate they pay, and therefore a much higher monthly mortgage bill. Some lenders have a much higher SVR than others. We tell our clients how important it is to choose a lender that treats its customers fairly when their rates come to an end, says Aaron Strutt of broker Trinity Financial. Number 5. Homeowners have become addicted to low rates. Many people have been shocked by the rise in mortgage rates since December 2021 because they had grown so accustomed to ultra-low interest rates for the previous decade or more. A variety of economic and pandemic reasons kept interest rates down as times at historic lows. Anyone who's bought a first home during that time would never have faced such a situation as now. Rates have been much higher in previous decades, but people are now borrowing more as house prices have soared. Lenders tested applicants' finances for their ability to cope with higher rates. That is now more reality than theory, and will lead some people to question whether they stretched themselves too far. Analysts say the availability of jobs and a relative lack of unemployment has saved many from having to sell up. The impact is felt by tenants too. Higher costs for landlords will push up rental prices and would lead to fewer homes being available to rent if they decide to leave the sector. Hamza Yusuf has said the SNP could make life very difficult for Labour in a hung parliament if it refused to give Scotland the power to call a referendum. Scotland's First Minister reiterated devolving this power would be the price for SNP support on Labour's agenda. However, he said it was obvious that independence was not the consistent, settled will of the Scottish people. Labour have repeatedly said they would not do a referendum deal with the SNP. UK leader Sir Keir Starmer has called for a snap general election, following Boris Johnson's shock resignation as an MP. Last month, senior figures in the SNP said that they could hold the balance of power in the next parliament, the most explicit statement yet of their strategy ahead of the next general election. They told the BBC they would make the demand for a referendum a central part of their general election campaign. Speaking on BBC One's Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, Mr Yousaf said having an independence referendum would be top of the list if Labour wanted SNP cooperation. He said we would never prop up a Conservative government, ever, and underline that and put that in bold. But of course, if Labour do not want to cooperate with us, then we would make life very difficult for them. Asked what he meant by this, Mr Yousaf pointed to budgets and the legislative process. There were some tricky times when we were a minority government, he said. What you want is a government, particularly if you're coming in fresh as a new government. You want stability. You want to be able to get your budget through. You want to be able to get your legislative agenda through. You don't want frustrated at every single corner and every single turn. Scottish Labour's deputy leader, Jackie Baillie, said Mr Yousaf's comments were an admission that he would usher in a Tory government. She said that threat is a betrayal to the people of Scotland, who are dealing with soaring living costs and falling wages. Scottish Conservative Chairman Craig Hoy said Mr Yousaf appeared confident he could hold a minority Labour government to ransom, and that Keir Starmer would cave in to demands for an independence vote. Mr Yousaf was sworn in as First Minister in March after he defeated rivals Kate Forbes and Ash Regan in a leadership contest that exposed deep divisions within the party. The 37-year-old became the first Muslim to lead a major UK party. He was widely assumed to be Nicola Sturgeon's preferred successor, although she did not explicitly back any of the candidates in the contest. Miss Sturgeon wanted to use the next general election in Scotland as a de facto referendum, though this would have had no effect in law. But in a rethink of strategy, Mr Yousaf has said he wanted to focus on making the case for independence because he knows pushing for a vote immediately will be rejected. In opinion polls, support for Scottish independence consistently sits in the mid to high 40s. Mr Yousaf told Laura Kuenssberg his preference was a legally binding referendum. He said, "Were there or thereabouts in relation to support for independence, I don't want to be there or thereabouts. I want to make sure that independence is a consistent, settled will." So at the moment, for example, it's pretty obvious that independence is not the consistent, settled will of the Scottish people. Mr Yousaf later added that support for independence is still rock solid. He said, "I've got no doubt at all that I will be the leader that will ensure that Scotland becomes an independent nation." Humza Yousaf's interview comes as the SNP prepares for a special convention to discuss the way towards independence. His comments will be looked at closely by both supporters and opponents. In many respects, he merely restated his position. His preferred option would be a referendum. He did not describe the next general election as a de facto referendum, but believes each vote for the SNP demonstrates support for independence. He hopes the right to hold a referendum could be extracted from Labour if it is the biggest party in a hung parliament. But Labour is clear that this will not happen. It believes any deal with the SNP could harm its recovery in England and fears it could drive away Scots who do not support another referendum. It was perhaps surprising to hear Mr Yousaf explicitly say that independence is not the consistent, settled will of the Scottish people. This may seem like a simple statement of fact given recent polling, but they are not words you would expect to hear from the First Minister committed to independence, as they could be seized on by opponents. Of course, Mr Yousaf wants that to change and wants support for independence to increase. He also confirmed that there needs to be a consistent majority for independence before a referendum should be held. So is the First Minister making a distinction between wanting Holyrood to have the right to hold a referendum and actually holding one? Clearly the consequences of losing a second referendum are something Mr Yousaf is well aware of, and he may be playing the longer and more subtle game. He only wants a vote to take place if it will secure independence. But will more impatient supporters of independence be content? Mr Yousaf's early days as First Minister have proved to be challenging, with the arrest and release of the SNP's chief executive and Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell, over a police investigation into the party's finances. There is also a looming legal row over Scotland's gender reform legislation and a row with the UK government over Scotland's deposit return schemes. The DRS was last week postponed until October 2025, when despite an ultimatum from the First Minister, the UK government excluded glass from the Scottish scheme. Mr Youssef has already warned that devolution is becoming unworkable and criticised the interfering Conservative government at Westminster. It comes after the Scottish Government's Independence Minister, Jamie Hepburn, told the Daily Record that the SNP should consider a multi-option referendum, including a Devo Max option. Several crew members filming the Gladiator sequel in Morocco have been injured in a stunt accident on set. The film's production company, Paramount Pictures, said the injuries were non-life-threatening and happened while shooting a planned stunt sequence. The crew members were all in stable condition and continue to receive treatment, the statement said. Earlier this week, The Sun reported there had been an explosion and 6 people went to hospital. It was terrifying. A huge ball of fire blew up and caught several crew members in its path. In years of filming, I've never seen an accident so scary, a source told the newspaper. Everyone involved, from the lowliest runners to the star names, have been shaken up by this, they added. In a statement, a Paramount Pictures spokesperson said the safety and full medical services team on site were able to act quickly so that those who were impacted immediately received necessary care. They said it has strict health and safety procedures in place on all our productions and would take all necessary precautions as we resume production. According to Variety, no cast members were injured. 6 people received treatment for burn injuries and 4 remain in hospital. Sir Ridley Scott, who directed the original 2000 historical drama film, is returning to direct the second instalment, which is scheduled to be released in November 2024. No title has yet been announced for the sequel, which stars normal people actor Paul Mescal, Denzel Washington and Connie Nielsen. The original film won 5 Oscars, including Best Actor for Russell Crowe, who played Roman General Maximus Decimus Meridius alongside Joaquin Phoenix as Emperor Commodus. The movie, set during the height of the Roman Empire, sees Maximus start out as a war hero before being forced to become a gladiator. Gladiator made $457 million, or £355 million, at the box office and revived the historical epic drama genre, which has been out of fashion for decades. Former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has been arrested in connection with the ongoing investigation into the funding and finances of the SNP. Police confirmed a 52-year-old woman was taken into custody as a suspect and is being questioned by detectives. On the 5th of April, officers searched Miss Sturgeon's home and the party's headquarters in Edinburgh. They also arrested her husband Peter Morrell, former SNP chief executive, who was released without charge. A luxury motorhome was also seized by police from outside the home of Mr Morrell's mother in Dunfermline. Also, almost 2 weeks later, SNP Treasurer Colin Beattie was arrested and released without charge. Mr Morrell and Mr Beattie were both treated as suspects and were taken into custody for the legally defined period of up to 12 hours of questioning before being released pending further inquiries. Under the Criminal Justice Scotland Act 2016, police can release a suspect for further investigation, but they can be rearrested at a later date. Thunderstorms and 30-degree temperatures are expected on Sunday after the UK saw its hottest day of the year on Saturday. The Met Office issued a yellow warning for thunderstorms from 12 o'clock until 9 p.m. on Sunday for Wales, Northern Ireland and most of western and central England and Scotland. It warned of heavy rain, hail, strong winds and lightning in some areas. On Saturday, temperatures reached 32.2 centigrade in Chertsey, Surrey. The Met Office has been expecting up to 100mm of rain on Saturday evening, which equates to a month's worth of rain, but the most recorded was 21.8mm in Billinge Hill, Merseyside. It said there was a small chance that homes and businesses could be flooded quickly on Sunday, with damage to some buildings from floodwater, lightning strikes, hail or strong winds. Delays and some cancellations to train and bus services could happen as a result of any flooding or lightning strikes, it added. Difficult driving conditions could also be expected as a result of spray and sun flooding, and there is a slight chance of power cuts. The UK Health Security Agency issued an amber hot weather alert until 9 a.m. British Standard Time on Tuesday for much of South England and the Midlands. It means high temperatures could affect all ages and impact the health service. Temperatures reached 29.8 in Auchencrieff, Ayrshire on Saturday, making it the warmest day of the year in Scotland. A temperature of 30.4 centigrade in Northolt, West London and Wisley, Surrey, made it the UK's hottest day of the year too. On Sunday there is likely to be more cloud, with maximum temperatures of 32 centigrades, the Met Office said. It forecasts that next week the risk of thundery downpours will continue in some areas and temperatures are likely to remain above average. Most of the UK will meet heat wave criteria next week, the Met Office added. The illegal migration bill breaches a number of the UK's human rights obligations, MPs and peers have said. The bill, which aims to deport those arriving in the UK without permission, would deny the majority of refugees any access to the asylum system, the Joint Committee on Human Rights said. Children and victims of trafficking and modern slavery would be impacted, Chairwoman Joanna Cherry added. The government said it took its international obligations seriously, however it had faced criticism from opposition parties and charities who argued the bill is unworkable and could breach international law. The legislation, intended to try to stop people crossing the English Channel in small boats, has already passed the Commons but has run into strong opposition in the House of Lords. It would give ministers the power to remove anyone arriving in the UK illegally, and migrants would then be barred from claiming asylum. Instead, they would be detained and removed either to Rwanda, with which the UK has an agreement, or another safe country. The bill would enshrine in law broad detention and search powers and deny protections to modern slavery victims, as well as removing the right of appeals following age assessments. Most asylum seekers arriving in the UK irregularly and indirectly after the legislation is passed would have their claim declared inadmissible, the committee's report, Legislative Scrutiny Illegal Migration Bill, says. Ms Cherry, an SNP MP and a barrister, said the most vulnerable would be disproportionately affected. They will also be subject to detention without time limit and removal from the UK irrespective of the merits of their claims, she said. By treating victims of modern slavery as illegal migrants, subject to detention and removal, this bill would breach our legal obligations to such victims and would risk increasing trafficking of vulnerable people. She added that most people fleeing persecution or conflict currently have no safe and legal way of getting there. The committee chairwoman also highlighted that Home Secretary Suella Braverman had taken the unusual steps of making a statutory declaration under the Human Rights Act, that she was unable to state that the bill was compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, when she introduced the bill to Parliament. However, she has stated elsewhere that the bill is compatible with international law. We disagree. Having carried out legislative scrutiny of the bill, it is overwhelmingly clear that it breaches a number of the UK's international human rights obligations, including the ECHR, and risks breaching others. The government has said the plans are central to achieving Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's pledge to stop small boat crossings, one of his 5 key priorities. The Home Office also argued that excluding children and modern slavery victims from the scope of the bill could provide incentives to human traffickers. A spokesperson said it is not compassionate to allow people to die in the Channel. We cannot allow a system to continue where people are incentivised to make dangerous, illegal and unnecessary journeys to the UK, which is why the illegal migration bill will see people who enter the country swiftly returned home if it is safe or removed to a safe third country. They continued saying the legislation would send a clear message that the exploitation of people ferried across the Channel must end, adding, "We remain committed to ensuring the bill passes through Parliament as soon as possible so we can stop the boats." Former US President Donald Trump appeared defiant at two Republican Party conventions on Saturday, a day after he was charged with mishandling classified documents. Mr. Trump, who is running to be the Republican candidate for president in 2024, claimed that he was being pursued in federal court because of his re-election hopes. But at the North Carolina Republican Party convention, he didn't look like a man under severe legal stress. Hundreds of people stood up to welcome their former president as he walked onto the stage. Happily soaking in the adulation, he was the main event after a three-course meal. There was salad to start, steak for the main, and ice cream with strawberries for dessert, washed down with jugs of Coke. It was just a day after an indictment was unsealed, revealing federal charges against Mr. Trump, accusing him of mishandling classified documents, including nuclear secrets. But Mr. Trump, who denies wrongdoing, was characteristically combative. He suggested nothing will stop him on his quest for the presidency, not even reportedly jail. And in the vast conference room, they didn't want him to stop. They laughed at his jokes, offered regular applause, and welcomed bold declarations, for example that he is the only candidate who can prevent World War III. This was, after all, a Republican Party convention, dinner with guests who had paid to see him speak. Earlier, former Vice President Mike Pence received a warm reception, but it was nothing like the intense buzz that surrounded his ex-boss. What's more, the one-term Vice President got the lunch slot while Mr. Trump got dinner. He was the big Saturday night ticket. Earlier in the day, amongst the merchandise and campaign stands, they came across Cheryl Kaufman and Charlie Tyne. Charlie proudly stripped off her jacket to reveal a Trump-branded t-shirt. "I'm Trump all the way," she said. I pointed out the photographs printed out as part of the Justice Department's case that showed boxes of files piled up in a bathroom, even so in Mr. Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. "Wait a minute," said Cheryl. "This is America. We're not guilty until we're proven guilty." The two believe the system is riddled with double standards and said they would support Mr. Trump even if he was convicted. If elected, he could, suggested Cheryl, even pardon himself from prison. An unshakable support for Mr. Trump echoed through the halls, with his name and image visibly dominant on printed banners and baseball caps. But there were those who were open to possibilities beyond Mr. Trump's narrative. "The truth matters," said husband and wife Jeff and Laura Morgan. "If the truth is that there's impropriety, that needs to be brought out," said Jeff. "It is politically motivated, that needs to be brought out." Laura is a previous Miss Senior America, while Jeff is running for mayor of Pinehurst, North Carolina. She conceded there is a lot of drama surrounding the current frontrunner. "I think people ought to just run on their merits and not be bashing and blamed." They saw Mr. Trump's legal baggage as both a potential issue, but also a rallying point for his base. Mr. Trump did not spend his whole speech ridiculing the charges against him, far from it. A long, whining address touched on everything from the cost of living to transgender people's participation in sport to trade with China and France. At one point, Mr. Trump mimicked French President Emmanuel Macron's accent. Then, in a few minutes, he was gone and the room quickly emptied out, with half-eaten steaks and wilting salad leaves left behind. It was notable that the first former president to ever face federal criminal charges did not spend the day holed up with his lawyers ahead of his first court appearance on Tuesday. He spent it addressing the party faithful in Georgia and then here in Greensboro, loudly airing messages of defiance rather than privately preparing for court. Mr. Trump's legal battles have, in fact, become completely intertwined with his wider public presidential campaign. The US could face an unprecedented strain on its political and judicial system should the two truly collide next year. Ted Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber, has been found dead in his prison cell, federal officials have confirmed. Kaczynski, aged 81, killed 3 people and injured 23 more during a mass mail-bombing spree between 1978 and 1995. He later pleaded guilty to his crimes. He was sentenced to life without parole in 1996 after evading capture for almost 20 years. The Harvard-trained mathematician was eventually caught in a Montana cabin. He was a man who fascinated America for decades, and he became the focus of numerous TV documentaries. Kaczynski spent the past 3 decades held at prisons across the US, most recently at the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina. Prison guards at the facility discovered Kaczynski's body on Saturday morning at about 12 a.m. local time, or 4:25 a.m. GMT, a spokesperson for the US Bureau of Prisons has said. His cause of death was not immediately clear. Responding, staff immediately initiated life-saving measures, the spokesperson said. Kaczynski was then transported by EMS to a local hospital and subsequently pronounced deceased by hospital personnel. Before suffering from declining health, which prompted his transfer to the facility in December 2021, he had been held at the federal Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado since May 1998. Kaczynski's violent campaign, which shook the US, left a number of his victims permanently maimed and changed the way Americans posted letters. His crimes were uncovered after he forced the Washington Post and the New York Times to publish his unhinged and angry manifesto, called Industrial Society and Its Future, in September 1995. They agreed to print the manifestos on the recommendation of the FBI and the US Attorney General after Kaczynski said he would end his campaign if a national paper published his treatise. The 35,000-word anonymized document rallied against modern life and claimed that technology was leading to Americans suffering from a sense of alienation and powerlessness. But after reading the papers, Kaczynski's brother and sister-in-law recognized the tone and alerted the FBI, who had been searching for him for years in the nation's longest manhunt. In April 1996, authorities finally caught up with him in a 10 by 14 foot or 3 by 4 meter plywood and tar paper cabin outside Lincoln, Montana. The hut was filled with journals, a coded diary, explosives, and 2 completed bombs. While Kaczynski's manifesto struck many as being overtly political in tone, he never sought to embody the revolutionary mantle some attributed to him. In his own journals, he wrote that he didn't claim to be altruistic or to be acting for the good, whatever that is, of the human race, instead insisting that he acted merely from a desire for revenge. His crimes seemed to begin shortly after he was fired from the family business by his brother for posting abusive limericks to a female colleague who had dumped him after 2 dates. From there he retreated to the Montana wilderness and to the cabin he had built by hand without heating, plumbing or electricity. His first attacks targeted Northwestern University in Illinois. The 2 bombings occurred almost a year apart on the 25th of May 1978 and the 9th of May 1979, injuring 2 people. Then in November 1979, an altitude-triggered bomb he had mailed went off aboard an American Airlines flight. 12 people suffered from smoke inhalation. The early attacks earned him the moniker Un-Bomber from the FBI, as his targets seemed to be universities and airlines. Over the following years, he attacked a further 13 times, killing the 3 people: computer rental store owner Hugh Scruton, advertising executive Thomas Musser, and timber industry lobbyist Gilbert Murray. At Kaczynski's trial, Mr. Moss's wife said her husband had been killed on the day he was supposed to be picking up a Christmas tree with his family and recalled the moments after the attack. He was moaning very softly, she said of her husband. The fingers of his right hand were dangling. I left his left hand. I told him help was coming. I told him I loved him. Since his capture, there has been endless speculation about Kaczynski's motivations. A test as a boy revealed he possessed an IQ of 167, and he had skipped 2 grades to attend Harvard University, aged just 16. FBI agents described him as a twisted genius who aspires to be the perfect anonymous killer, and he was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic by a psychiatrist who interviewed him in prison. In a 47-page report, Sally Johnson wrote that the central themes of his manifesto involved his belief that he is being maligned and harassed by family members and modern society. But Kaczynski himself always insisted that he knew exactly what he was doing, and he tried to take his own life in prison after his legal team attempted to introduce an insanity plea. In an interview with Time magazine in 1999, he said he didn't suffer from delusions, and so on and so forth. I'm confident that I'm sane, personally, he said. Four children who survived weeks alone in Colombia's Amazon jungle have been reunited with relatives as they recover in hospital. The siblings, aged 13, 9, 5 and 1, are very weak but happy to see their family, said their grandfather, Fidencio Valencia. They are speaking a little and 2 of them have begun playing, officials say. The 4 children were found on Friday, after more than a month of searching by the military and local people. They went missing after the plane they were in crashed on the 1st of May. Their mother and 2 pilots were killed in the crash. Rescuers tracked them down after spotting signs in the jungle, including footprints and fruit that had been bitten into. 2 of the children, the 1-year-old baby and 5-year-old, spent their birthdays in the jungle, as the eldest, Leslie, 13, guided them through the ordeal. They survived by eating a flower that they found in the plane's wreckage, and then seeds, Mr. Valencia said. Colombia's Defense Minister Ivan Velasquez, who visited them in the hospital with President Gustavo Petro on Saturday, praised Leslie for taking care of her younger siblings. It is thanks to her, her value and her leadership that the 3 others were able to survive with her care, her knowledge of the jungle, Mr. Velasquez said. In general, the children, the boy and the girls, are in an acceptable state. According to the medical reports, they are out of danger. Military doctor Carlos Rincon said they have nutritional deficiencies, but had survived with only some soft tissue injuries, bites and skin lesions. They are not yet able to eat, he said, adding, "We will begin the process of incorporating food when we complete the process of clinical examinations. That will be done today. If things go well, we believe they will stay in the hospital for 2 to 3 weeks. Astrid Carrez, the general director of the Colombian Institute of Family Welfare, said the children don't talk as much as we would like them to and need time to recover. But she said 2 of the children have been playing. The children belong to the Hututu indigenous group. General Pedro Sanchez, who led the search operation, credited indigenous people who volunteered to help the rescue effort. "We found the children. Miracle, miracle, miracle," he told reporters. Some rescuers are continuing to search the jungle for a rescue dog, a Belgian shepherd that went missing during the hunt for the children. The children's grandmother, Fatima Valencia, said after their rescue, "I am very grateful, and to the Mother Earth as well, that they were set free." She said the eldest of the 4 siblings was used to looking after the other 3 when their mother was at work, and that this helped them survive in the jungle. She gave them flour and cassava bread. "Any fruit in the bush, they know what they must consume," Miss Valencia said in footage obtained by EBN. The Cessna 206 aircraft the children and their mother had been travelling on before the crash was flying from Aracura in Amazonas province to San Jose del Guevara when it issued a Mayday alert due to engine failure. The bodies of the 3 adults were found at the crash site by the army, but it appeared that the children had escaped the wreckage and wandered into the rainforest to find help. In May, rescuers recovered items left behind by the children, including a children's drinking bottle, a pair of scissors, a hair tie and a makeshift shelter. Small footprints were also discovered, which led search teams to believe the children were still alive in the rainforest, which is home to jaguars, snakes and other predators. Members of the children's community hoped that their knowledge of fruits and jungle survival skills would give them a better chance of remaining alive. Indigenous people joined the search, and helicopters broadcast a message from the children's grandmother recorded in the Hututu language, urging them to stop moving to make them easier to locate. The eastern Ukrainian town of Bakhmut is now known across the world as the site of the longest and possibly bloodiest battle in Russia's war on Ukraine. It is now almost completely destroyed, and almost all of its ruins are controlled by Russian forces. Nearly every single resident has now left, and those that have been able to be contacted describe Bakhmut before the war as extremely well looked after, cosy and leafy. They also speak fondly of the 2 things which have made the town famous: sparkling wine and salt. The city was known far beyond Ukraine's borders for its sparkling wine. The local winery, set up in a huge abandoned gypsum mine in the 1950s, was among the biggest and best producers of the fizzy drink in the USSR and then in independent Ukraine. Its location, about 70 meters below ground, made it easier to achieve the right temperature for the drink to ferment. It is now owned by a company called Art Winery, and its marketing director, Alexandra Cheregnochenko, said about the first time she visited the vast caves. It was an amazing feeling. It is an underground city, so vast that they used proper vehicles to get about within it. Lorries to transport goods, and people used buggies. There were endless rows of bottles, and you couldn't see where they ended. It was very nice inside, with classical music playing, and walls painted yellow, green and red. It was mesmerising. Nothing beats wine testing underground. It is one of the main symbols of Bakhmut, and it had a soul. Company workers planted a vineyard right next to the main office, and there was a nice garden with peacocks, Alexandra said. For decades, sparkling wine from Bakhmut was highly sought after in the Soviet Union, and it was popular during celebrations such as weddings or New Year's Eve. The winery's operations were suspended the day Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022, and most of its employees were evacuated out of Bakhmut. In May 2023, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner mercenary group, said all of the winery's buildings had been destroyed. Wagner has been at the forefront of Russian forces fighting Ukrainian troops in Bakhmut. Salt is another product which has made Bakhmut well known in Ukraine and beyond. Before the war, the salt mining company Artemsil produced more than 7 million tons of salt a year, exporting it to 22 countries from Armenia to Denmark. It was a prestigious company to work for. When I got a job there, people were surprised I got hired without powerful friends in high places, said Alex Zelika, who spent almost 20 years working for Artemsil. It was the best time of my life. We felt secure. War changed everything. Anna Zelika told the story of two former colleagues who worked in a lab next door to her office. One was killed when a missile hit her house in January. It happened on her birthday, actually. The other one has started drinking herself to death. It could be the feeling of helplessness or the stress of it all, she said. Anna Zelika remembers Bakhmut as a beautiful, well-looked-after city. Our government had decided to make a showcase out of such frontline cities to show those who left Ukraine what they were missing. A lot of money was spent on Bakhmut over the last few years. Natalia Putra, a piano teacher at Bakhmut's Culture and Arts College, has similar memories of the city. It was stunningly beautiful. The local authorities took good care of roads and pavements. This may not be such a big deal for Europe, but for us it was unusual. They had built a marvellous stadium and refurbished our college lavishly. Newly very good musical instruments were bought. Her college hosted piano competitions for all of Ukraine and held frequent public concerts to mark occasions such as St. Valentine's Day or New Year's Eve. There is no life without culture and art. Bakhmut was always interested in culture, Natalia said. One of her students, Alexandra, has found memories of the college in Bakhmut. We were there at dawn and went home at sunset. The night guard would tell us to get out of the college at 9 in the evening, and I remember that on the way home everything felt just right. It was the right time and place to be. It was our home. Alexandra has vivid memories of the night before Russia's full-scale invasion last year. On the 23rd of February, we held a massive concert, and I remember the beautiful sunset that evening. I was walking home looking at the sky and the stars, and I wondered how long will the sky above stay peaceful. The stars were absolutely amazing at that night. The next morning we were woken up by people shouting that war had started and our cities were being bombed. Alexandra said that this had been devastating to see her college being damaged by fighting. I had tears in my eyes when I saw photos of our concert hall after it had been hit, right where our beloved grand piano was. It was every pianist's dream to take to that stage and play it. When we learnt that all the windows got smashed, we knew that that was the end of our pianos. All the strings will go rusty because of the damp, she says. After the start of the war, the college moved to Kamyanets-Politsky, a city in western Ukraine. This changed the dynamic of our relationship with teachers completely, says Alexandra. We are one big family now because we've all lost our homes. We've been through all this together. The support we're getting from each other is priceless. Her teacher Natalia agrees. Yes, we're family. We meet after work and we stay in touch. We go out all the time for a cup of coffee or just for a chat in a cafe. This must be the warmth we've brought from Bakhmut. We're trying hard to preserve it because it's tough living without a home. But despite the tragedy of Bakhmut's destruction, Natalia has one dream, to return to her native eastern Ukraine, even if it won't be Bakhmut. Five workers have been killed by a huge blast at a rocket and explosive factory in Turkey, officials have said. It happened early on Saturday morning at the state-owned MKE rocket and explosives factory, 40 kilometers or 25 miles east of the capital Ankara. Several others were injured by the blast, which state TV said shattered windows in nearby homes and shops. Officials said the explosion was caused by an incident in the factory's dynamite department. Regional Governor Vahat Sahin said that no other workers or staff remained trapped in the rubble, and state media reported that wounded employees had been transferred to local hospitals. Several are said to be in a critical condition. Mr. Sahin told reporters that the explosion was the result of a chemical experiment, according to technical staff, and that it happened at 8:45 local time, or 5:45 am Greenwich Mean Time. In a statement, Deputy Defence Minister Alparslan Kavakoglu said officials had reviewed footage from inside the building in the moments before the blast, and that there was nothing out of the ordinary until the moment of the explosion. Our workers were carrying out their normal activities, and the explosion happened suddenly, he added. Images showed ambulances at the factory, and firefighters are reportedly fighting a series of small blazes. Meanwhile, a number of family members gathered awaiting news on their loved ones. The Ministry of Defence said in a statement that a judicial and administrative investigation had been initiated regarding the incident, while regional prosecutors said they were looking into what happened. Turkey's recently re-elected President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was briefed on the incident by Defence Minister Yasser Güler and sent his condolences to the families of the victims, a statement from his communications office said. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky appears to have confirmed that his country's long-awaited counter-offensive against Russia has started. Counter-offensive and defensive actions are taking place, he said, but he added that he would not talk in detail about which stage or state the counter-offensive was in. The comments come after an escalation of fighting in the south and east of Ukraine and speculation about progress of the widely anticipated push. Ukrainian troops are reported to have advanced in the east near Bakhmut and in the south near Zaporizhzhia and have carried out long-range strikes on Russian targets, but assessing the reality on the front lines is difficult with the two warring sides presenting contrasting narratives, Ukraine claiming progress and Russia that it is fighting off attacks. Meanwhile, in Russia's Kaluga region, which borders the southern districts around Moscow, Governor Vladislav Shapsha said on Telegram that a drone crashed near the village of Shrekhov early on Sunday. This has not been independently verified. Russian President Vladimir Putin said in a video interview published on Friday that Ukrainian forces had certainly begun their offensive, but that attempted advances had failed with heavy casualties. Speaking in Kiev on Saturday after talks with Canadian PM Justin Trudeau, Mr. Zelensky described the Russian leader's words as interesting. Shrugging his shoulders, raising his eyebrows and pretending not to know who Mr. Putin was, Mr. Zelensky said it was important that Russian felt they did not have long left. He also said that Ukraine's military commanders were in a positive mood, adding, "Tell that to Putin." Mr. Trudeau announced $500 million Canadian dollars or £297 million in new military aid for Ukraine during the unannounced visit. A joint statement issued after the talks said Canada supports Ukraine becoming a NATO member as soon as conditions allow for it, adding that the issue would be discussed at the NATO summit in Vilnius, Lithuania in July. Meanwhile, fighting has escalated in recent days in the key southern Zaporizhzhia region, Russian officials say. Ukrainian forces are thought to be trying to push south to split Russian forces in two, breaking through the occupied territory which connects Russia to Crimea. Ukraine's hope of advances in the region could be hindered by huge flooding in the south of the country after the Novokharkovka dam was destroyed last week. The flooding has covered around 230 square miles or 596 square kilometers either side of the Dnipro River. In his nightly address on Saturday, Mr. Zelensky said 3,000 people had been evacuated from the flooded Kherson and Mykolaiv regions, and Kherson's regional head Alexander Prokudin said water levels had dropped by 27 centimeters, but more than 30 settlements on the right bank of the river, which is Ukrainian-held territory, were still flooded and almost 4,000 residential buildings remained underwater. NATO and Ukraine's military have accused Russia of blowing up the dam, while Russia has blamed Ukraine. However, it seems highly likely that Russian forces, which control the dam, decided to blow it up in order to make it difficult for Ukrainian forces to cross the river as part of their ongoing counteroffensive. Romania has recalled its ambassador to Kenya and apologised after he compared Africans to monkeys. Dragos Tigao made the comments during a meeting at a UN building in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, on April 26. According to the AFP news agency, Mr. Tigao said the African group has joined us when he saw a monkey outside a window. Mr. Tigao's behaviour was first made public on Thursday by Kenyan Foreign Affairs official Kamal Macharia. On Twitter, Mr. Macharia said he was left appalled and disgusted by the incident and claimed that attempts were made to cover up Mr. Tigao's behaviour. African diplomats on Friday demanded a public apology, according to Kenya's Standard newspaper, insisting that a private apology was not enough. On Saturday, Romania announced that it had only been informed of the incident last week and had now begun a procedure to recall its ambassador. We deeply regret the situation and offer our apologies to all those who have been affected. The statement from Romania's Foreign Affairs Ministry read, "Any behaviours or comments of a racist nature are completely unacceptable," it added, saying it hoped it would not affect its ties with African countries. Romania mainly engages with African nations through its membership of the European Union, but it has bilateral trade agreements with Egypt, among others. The Kenyan government has not commented on the decision to recall Mr. Tigao. Romanian media have criticised his behaviour and say this is not the first time the country has been embarrassed by insults dished out by diplomats. In 2014, Romania's ambassador to Armenia was recalled after making anti-Semitic jokes about Jewish bosses and questioning the morality of same-sex relationships. The following year, Bucharest apologised after invitations to a reception at its Paris embassy accidentally included unflattering descriptions of some guests, labelling them ghastly and undesirable, among other things. Doctors treating Pope Francis say he is recovering well from surgery, but have asked him not to deliver his Sunday blessing from a hospital balcony. He underwent a 3-hour operation to repair an abdominal hernia in Rome's Gemelli Hospital on Wednesday. Briefing reporters on Saturday, surgeon Sergio Alfieri said the 86-year-old would not perform the weekly blessing to avoid strain on his abdomen. He added that the Pope would stay in hospital for all of next week. Vatican spokesperson Matteo Bruni said that the Pope would instead say the traditional noon Angelus prayer from his hospital suite and urged the world's Catholics to join him. Only 3 days later have passed. We asked the Holy Father to be prudent and avoid the strain of standing at the balcony, Dr. Alfieri told reporters. He added that the Pope had a mesh prosthetic inserted into his abdominal wall to help it heal, and doctors want it to settle and attach properly to avoid another operation if it breaks. You can understand how that would not be pleasing for him, and for me, Dr. Alfieri joked. Each time he gets out of bed and sits in an armchair, puts stress on the abdominal wards. But he insisted that Pope Francis remained in good spirits and had started eating a diet of semi-solid foods again. The pontiff did not have fever, the doctor said, adding that his heart rate and blood pressure was stable. Pope Francis, who was chosen by cardinals to lead the Catholic Church after his predecessor, Pope Benedict, resigned in 2013, has faced a host of health issues in recent years. Due to knee pain, he regularly uses a cane and wheelchair to get around, and in March he spent 3 days in hospital to treat a lung infection. In December 2021, he spent 10 days in hospital after having a part of his colon removed, while last month he pulled out his Friday's audiences due to a fever. But while his predecessor, Benedict the 14th, quit the role citing health issues, becoming the first pontiff to resign in nearly 600 years, Pope Francis has dismissed the possibility of leaving office too. "You don't run the church with a knee, but with a head," he is said to have told an aide last year. The Pope is considered to have been in general good health during his decade leading the Catholic Church. He continued to maintain a busy schedule and is due to visit Portugal and Mongolia from August. A man suspected of stabbing 4 young children in a playground in the French resort of Annecy is held on attempted murder charges, French prosecutors say. The children, aged between 1 and 3, were attacked with a knife in a park in the Alpine region on Thursday. Prosecutors said the actions of Syrian-born Abdelmasih Hanoun, who they referred to as Abdelmasih H, did not appear linked to terrorism. The suspect, aged 31, remained silent in police interviews, prosecutors said. He has not been cooperating with investigators. In fact, he has refused to communicate with them and has spent much of the last 48 hours curled up in the corner of his cell. Police had to physically carry him to his brief hearing before a judge on Saturday, where he was formally placed under investigation for attempted murder. He will remain in custody. Local prosecutor Lise Bonnet-Matisse said during a news conference that the suspect had been assessed by a psychiatrist while in custody and had been determined fit to appear before a court. She added that it was too early to make any kind of conclusion regarding his mental status. The brutal attack on victims so young its horror captured on video has shocked France. Footage uploaded to social media showed people screaming soon after a man holding a knife entered a playground next to a lake in Annecy. Video that is too graphic for broadcast showed him attacking a child in a pushchair. He then fled the scene and stabbed an elderly man nearby. Police intervened and the attacker was shot in the legs. President Emmanuel Macron described it as an act of cowardice and travelled to the southeastern region on Friday to visit victims and their families in a hospital. The attack has also fueled further fierce debate about immigration policy in France, after it was found that the suspect has refugee status in Sweden and has also successfully been seeking asylum in France, Italy and Switzerland. Ms. Bonnet-Matisse said the 4 children, including a British girl who was on holiday with her parents in Annecy, were no longer in critical conditions in hospital. The British girl was stabbed once by the attacker and was gravely wounded, but did not sustain life-threatening injuries, Ms. Bonnet-Matisse said. 2 of the other children were French nationals from the eastern region of Haute-Savoie. She added, the other was a Dutch national who has been transferred to a hospital in Geneva for treatment. 2 adults who were also injured during the attack are also out of danger. One of the adults, who was first stabbed by the attacker, was hit by a police bullet while officers were attempting to stop the assailant, the prosecutor confirmed. The other adult, Yusuf, aged 78, suffered a minor injury. Officials are referring to the suspect as Abdelmasih H, but his full surname is widely reported. The knifeman's motivation remains unclear. Witnesses said that during the incident, the attacker invoked the name of Jesus Christ, and in an unsuccessful asylum application last year for refugee status in France, he said he was a Syrian Christian. He had recently come to France after leaving behind a wife and 3-year-old daughter in Sweden, where he has refugee status. French television broadcast pictures of the suspect being moved from the police station ahead of his appearance before a judge. BFM images showed the suspect being carried out on a stretcher to a black car at the rear of the police station, and then a convoy of vehicles leaving the area. Partners at a prominent finance firm have said its founder, Crispin Odey, is leaving after sexual harassment allegations. The move follows a Financial Times report that 13 women had accused Mr. Odey of sexual harassment or assault over 25 years. Mr. Odey strenuously denies the claims. He told the paper they were rubbish and hinted he could resist the move. The hedge fund said it took allegations of misconduct extremely seriously. For more than 3 decades, Mr. Odey had been at the helm of the hedge fund he founded in 1991. At its peak, the firm managed more than £10 billion worth of investments. Mr. Odey, a prominent Brexit backer, claimed to have made hundreds of millions of pounds as sterling plummeted in the aftermath of the referendum vote. On Thursday, the Financial Times reported that the allegations dated back to 1998, and the latest alleged incident was in December 2021. Mr. Odey said this week that none of the allegations had been stood up in a courtroom or an investigation. Speaking to the Financial Times on Saturday, he also suggested that he could fight the firm's decision. You have to have a willing buyer, willing seller, he told the paper. A statement from Odey Asset Management executive on Saturday said that Mr. Odey would be leaving. As from today, he will no longer have any economic or personal involvement in the partnership, it said. O'Day Asset Management Group Ltd will also cease to be a member, and the partnership will now be owned and controlled by the remaining partners and managed as an independent legal entity. The executive committee said the firm's policies and procedures have been followed at all times. The firm has been investigating allegations concerning Mr. O'Day, but the firm cannot comment in detail as it is bound by legal obligations of confidentiality. O'Day Asset Management said it had been fully transparent with the regulator Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) and would contact clients over the weekend. The windfall tax on oil and gas firms will be scrapped if prices fall to normal levels for a sustained period, the government has announced. Halting the windfall tax would cut the overall tax rate on energy firms from 75% to 40%. A windfall tax is used to target firms which benefit from something they were not responsible for. It was introduced last year to help fund a scheme to lower energy bills for households and businesses. Energy firms' profits have soared recently, initially due to rising demand after COVID restrictions were lifted, and then because Russia's invasion of Ukraine raised energy prices, but oil and gas prices have now come down from their highs. In a statement, the Treasury said the windfall tax, called the Energy Profits Levy, will end if average oil and gas prices fall to or below a set level for 2 consecutive 3-month periods. If not, the tax will remain in place until March 2028. The level has been set at $71.40 per barrel for oil and 54 pence per therm for gas. Brent crude oil was trading at $75 per barrel on Friday morning, with gas prices at around 62 pence. Energy firms have been urging ministers to reduce the windfall tax, warning that it was causing companies to pull back investment. In April, the UK's largest oil and gas producer, Harbour, said it would shed 350 UK onshore jobs as a result of the windfall tax. French oil giant Total Energies also said it would cut its planned 2023 North Sea investment by a quarter, £100 million, because of the extension to the windfall tax. The Treasury said its decision had reflected those concerns. It said any fall in investment puts the long-term future of the UK's domestic supply at risk, meaning we would be forced to import more from abroad, and at a time when reliable and affordable energy is a focus for families and businesses. A Labour spokesperson said, "We need a proper windfall tax on the enormous profits of oil and gas giants to help with ease the cost of living crisis. We will look at the details of this change. Of course, if the windfalls of war disappear, then we'll look at what the right long-term tax position should be for the North Sea." How does the windfall tax work? Prime Minister Rishi Sunak introduced the Energy Profits Levy in May last year when he was Chancellor, with the rate set at 25%. In the autumn, current Chancellor Jeremy Hunt announced it would increase to 35% from January 2023. The levy applies to profits made from extracting UK oil and gas, but not from other activities such as refining oil and selling petrol and diesel on forecourts. Oil and gas firms operating in the North Sea already pay 30% corporation tax on their profits and a supplementary 10% rate on top of that. So with windfall tax, that takes the overall tax rate faced by oil and gas companies to 75%. If it was eliminated, the overall tax rate on energy firms would return to 40%. Trade body Onshore Energies UK welcomed the announcement, but warned the industry still faced challenges. Its chief executive David Whitehouse said this is a step in the right direction, but many more will need to be taken to restore confidence to our sector. We will work now more closely with the government and lenders to understand the detail of the measures and its effectiveness at unlocking investment. Oil and gas giant Shell also welcomed the announcement. The spokesperson said it should help to improve investor confidence in the UK North Sea, which will remain crucial to maintaining Britain's energy security in the coming years. However, the change to the windfall tax was criticised by the Green Party. The government seems happy to allow these huge corporations to not only wreck the climate, but to profit off the back of the cost of living crisis, which they themselves have contributed to, said Green co-leader Adrian Ramsey. Instead, the government should be tightening the tax, closing the loopholes and ensuring the money raised helps people through the cost of living crisis and funds the sustainable green energy jobs in the renewable sector we urgently need. Greenpeace's UK's climate campaigner, Georgia Whittaker, said irrespective of what happens to the price of oil and gas, the tax these companies pay should be higher, permanently. This cash should be used to help insulate homes and transition the UK to clean, cheap energy, not fill the bank balances of already wealthy shareholders. Thousands of Reddit communities will be inaccessible on Monday in protest at how the site is being run. Reddit is introducing controversial charges to developers of third-party apps, which are used to browse the social media platform. But this has resulted in a backlash, with moderators of some of the biggest subreddits making their communities private for 48 hours in protest. Almost 3,500 subreddits will be inaccessible as a result. A subreddit is the name given to a forum within the Reddit platform, effectively a community of people who gather to discuss a particular interest. Reddit users or Redditors will typically join a variety of subreddits rather than following individual users on other platforms and see posts from these communities in their feed. Reddit, unlike other social media sites, relies heavily on community moderation. As well as a few paid administrators, the website uses tens of thousands of unpaid moderators, known as mods, to keep the website functional. These mods may spend 1 or 2 hours per day, ensuring that their subreddit does not get filled with off-topic comments, content that is banned, or even content which is illegal. But the flip side of this is that Reddit does not charge any hosting fees for people who want to set up their own community based on an interest they have. In a post to the website on Friday, Reddit chief executive Steve Huffman said it needs to be a self-sustaining business and address the blackout. We respect when you and your communities take action to highlight the things you need, including at times going private, he said. We are all responsible for ensuring Reddit provides an open, accessible place for people to find community and belonging. He also confirmed that explicit content would remain on the site, but Reddit would limit how it can be accessed from third-party apps. The blackout will include 3,489 subreddits in total, including 5 of the 10 most popular communities on the site: R-Gaming, R-Or, R-Music, R-Today I Learned, and R-Pix, which each have memberships of more than 30 million people. A moderator for one of these subreddits has mentioned that the protest was about strength in numbers. If it was a single subreddit going private, Reddit may intervene, they said, but if it's half the entire website, then you feel a lot more pressured. This is a completely volunteer position. We don't receive any financial compensation, and despite that, we do like to take it quite seriously. They said they wanted Reddit admins to realise that they rely on moderators to operate the site, and felt that the only way to send a message was by harming Reddit's traffic. Our entire community is supporting us against this change, they said. It feels good to be able to have the power to say, we will not continue to moderate our communities if you push these changes through. If it's almost the entire website, would they destroy what they've built up in all these communities just to push through this highly unpopular change that both the mods and users of Reddit are overwhelmingly against? Reddit, which describes itself as the front page of the internet, has an official app, but it was developed in 2016, many years after the website was founded. Because of this, third-party apps such as Apollo, Reddit is Fun, Sync, and Red Planet were set up as a way for people to access the platform on their mobile devices. Reddit has introduced a series of charges to the developers who wish to continue using its application programming interface API, the behind-the-scenes code which allows third-party apps to find and show the content on Reddit. All 4 of these apps have said they will be shutting down as a result of Reddit's new API pricing. These charges have been heavily criticised as extortionate, with Apollo developer Christian Selig claiming it would end up costing him $20 million or £15.9 million to continue operating the app. But a Reddit spokesperson has said that Apollo was notably less efficient than other third-party apps. They said the social media platform spends multi-millions of dollars on hosting fees and needs to be fairly paid to continue supporting third-party apps. Our pricing is based on usage levels that we measure to be comparable to our own costs, they said. The spokesperson also said that not all third-party apps would require paid access. Previously, Reddit announced it would not charge apps which make the platform more accessible. but the moderator has mentioned that they believe the blackout could continue until Reddit row back on the changes. The current plan for many communities is they might even keep the blackout going for longer, beyond the original 48 hours, or keep their subreddits restricted so that nobody can post, they said. Every community operates differently and different moderators have different views on what's happening right now, so it does vary. But given recent communications between moderators and recent Reddit admins, I don't believe that they are intending to reverse these changes. And in some communities, such as R-Music, which has 32 million members, say their subreddit will indefinitely be inaccessible until Reddit reverses its policy. Tesco could be breaking the law over how it displays club card prices, according to consumer group Which. The group says Tesco does not explain the unit prices of deals clearly enough to shoppers, making it hard for them to determine the cheapest products. Which has reported the supermarket to the regulator, the Competition and Markets Authority, CMA. In response, Tesco said it complied with all current rules and called Which's claims ill-founded. Heinz tomato ketchup was one of the items that Which highlighted in its report into pricing at Tesco. It found a 700-gram bottle in Tesco for which the label showed the standard price to be £3.90 or 55.7 pence per 100 grams. A prominent club card label showed the same size bottle on offer at £3.50, but the unit price, which would be 50 pence per 100 grams, was not given. A 910-gram bottle of the same ketchup on the shelf below was priced at £3.99 or 43.8 pence per 100 grams for all shoppers, making it the cheapest option per 100 grams. Which argued many shoppers would wrongly assume the club card option was the best deal available. The Tesco Club Card is a loyalty scheme that offers members discounted prices on products. Which said that Tesco's decision not to display unit pricing on its club card offers could be breaking the law. According to competition rules, unit prices could be seen as material information, which most people would need in order to make an informed decision about how to get the best value from what they are buying. Which head of food policy, Sue Davies, said given the backdrop of a cost of living crisis, supermarkets should not be cutting corners. They have a duty to ensure pricing is clear so that customers can get the best value. Tesco's unclear club card pricing is at best confusing for shoppers struggling with soaring food inflation, and at worst could be breaking the law, she said. This is simply not good enough from the UK's biggest supermarket. Tesco should think of its customers and act now to introduce clear unit pricing on all offers, including club card promotions, so shoppers can easily find the best value items. A spokesperson for Tesco said the company had sought advice and approval from its local trading standards office in Hertfordshire, where its headquarters are based. Providing great value and clear pricing is really important to us. We are supportive of calls for greater clarity on the regulations in this area, it said. However, given that we are complying with all the current rules, we are disappointed at that Which has chosen to make these ill-founded claims against our club card prices scheme, which helps millions of households get great value week in, week out. The CMA is already investigating whether supermarkets are making excess profits through inflated prices. In May, the boss of Sainsbury's, Simon Roberts, said that supermarkets were not profiteering from high inflation. Meta has shown staff plans for a text-based social network designed to compete with Twitter, they have mentioned to the BBC. It could allow users to follow accounts they already have followed on Instagram, Meta's image-sharing app. It could potentially allow them to bring over followers from decentralized platforms such as Mastodon. A Meta spokesperson confirmed that the platform was in development. We're exploring a standalone decentralized social networking for sharing text updates, they said. We believe that there's an opportunity for a separate space where creators and public figures can share timely updates about their interests. Meta's chief product officer Chris Cox said coding was underway on the platform. The tech giant aims to release it soon, although no date was given. There is some speculation that it could be as early as the end of June. Screenshots have appeared online which was shown internally to employees, potentially giving an idea of what the app will look like. Sources within the company have mentioned to the BBC that these leaked screenshots are genuine. If they are, the layout of this new platform will be familiar to anyone who has spent time on Twitter. The text-based network, which has been a working title of P92, could turn out to be a greater rival to Elon Musk's Twitter than either Blue Sky or Mastodon. While both have attracted users disillusioned with Twitter, starting afresh on a new social network and rebuilding a community is difficult. But the Instagram community is enormous. Meta says it has around 2 billion users, which dwarfs the 300 million that are believed to use Twitter, although its figures can no longer be verified. If even 25% of Instagram users can be coaxed into using P92, it will undoubtedly have a sexy name when it launches. It will instantly become bigger than its older rival. Meta says it takes inspiration from other products, although others put it less kindly. Stories on Facebook was based on a Snapchat feature, and Reels on Instagram is unmistakably similar to TikTok. Twitter has come under scrutiny in recent months over moderation on the platform, and in May withdrew from the EU's voluntary disinformation code. Under Mr. Musk, Twitter moderation has reportedly been reduced, which critics say allowed an increase in the spread of disinformation, but Mr. Musk says there is now less misinformation rather than more, since he took over in October 2022. Loo roll, butter and ketchup are more expensive in the UK compared to some of our biggest European neighbours, research for the BBC has suggested, but the UK is the cheapest for nappies and frozen pizza, consumer analyst Circana found. They compared the prices of 23 food and non-food items in France, Germany, the UK, Italy, Spain and the Netherlands, and they added up the cost of buying them all. Germany came out as the cheapest and France the most expensive. The snapshot suggested that shoppers in the UK were typically paying £3.80 for loo roll, when a comparable pack cost £2.66 in Italy and £2.87 in Germany. Canned fish like tuna typically cost £1.62 in the UK, but it is as dear as £3.15 in Italy and £2.51 in Spain. But the data also revealed that items like bread, eggs and cooking oil were all mostly cheaper in the UK. British households' budgets are being squeezed as overall food prices remain 90% higher than a year ago. The main UK supermarkets have denied making extra profits from high prices, and many have already been cutting the price of items like bread and butter, but Ananda Roy at Circana thinks retailers can go further. The prospect for UK households to continue paying more than they do already, even if inflation levels out, is untenable for many, said the Global Senior Vice President of Strategic Growth Insights. As commodity prices come down steadily, there is potential for retailers and brands to do more for hard-pressed consumers in the UK, added Mr. Roy. A recent survey from Oxford Economics found UK food costs were about 7% below the EU average, but that covers a huge variety of countries. We asked Circana, which specialises in analysing consumer data, to look at some specific products in countries with the biggest, most developed economies in the European Union. Whilst in the UK they're experiencing higher prices for certain everyday items, at the same they're paying less than our European counterparts for others. However, trying to compare the cost of food between countries is very complex, said William Woods, who covers the European grocery market as an analyst for Bernstein. There are a whole host of factors that can affect why food prices can differ. The level of competition is important. In Germany, more than 40% of the market is made up by the discount supermarkets with cheaper own label products. There are also differences in eating habits and levels of food production to take into account. The UK imports around 40% of its food. Mr. Roy at Circana said this meant it paid a buyer's premium in what is now an increasingly volatile supply chain. Brexit hasn't helped. Then there's politics, in other words, taxation, subsidies and regulation. In France, for instance, greater protection for producers may be driving some higher food prices in stores, said Mr. Woods. Mr. Roy and his team at Circana looked at the price per unit based on comparable pack sizes right across the category. The price you see in the charts is for the average of different types of products, including branded and non-branded items. The cost in euros was then converted into pounds using the Bank of England's conversion rate. The data is for March in the UK. It doesn't include the discounters at Aldi and Lidl, which make up 17% of the UK grocery sector, but the research covers around 80% of the market in each of the other 5 countries. There is a small snapshot. For instance, there's no fresh fruit and veg which was too difficult to compare because of seasonality, sizing, and the amount of produce grown domestically. The graph above shows the overall difference in price for the 23 products they looked at adding together. Germany is the cheapest at £20 less than France, which is way out in front. The shop in the UK is third cheapest in this league table, fairly similar in fact with Italy, Spain and the Netherlands. Andrew Opie from the British Retailer Consortium, BRC, said this research confirms UK consumers benefit from a highly competitive market, delivering some of the cheapest groceries in Europe. They believe it underestimates the savings British consumers are making when buying staple food items, including fresh produce, as well as the value consumers can find by shopping around, another benefit of the strong competition in the UK market. Food price inflation, the rate at which prices are changing, is affecting every European country. Mr. Roy said in recent weeks inflation has been easing in Germany, the Netherlands and Spain, where prices rose earlier than the UK. He expects the UK will follow suit over the next few months. How can I save money on my food shop? Look at your cupboards so you know what you already have. Head to the reduce section first to see if it has anything you need, and buy things close to their sell-by date, which will be cheaper, and use your freezer. Australian airline Qantas has relaxed its gender-based uniform rules, allowing male employees to wear makeup and have long hair. Its new style guide means female employees will no longer have to wear makeup and heels while on duty. Last year, an Australian trade union called on Qantas to move its uniform policy into the 21st century. It comes after rival airlines eased their rulings, with Virgin Atlantic adopting gender-neutral uniforms. Along with being able to wear flat shoes, both men and women will be allowed to wear the same sort of jewellery, including large watches. The new rules also mean all employees, including pilots and flight attendants, can have long hair if it is worn in a ponytail or a bun. Fashions change, and so have our style guidelines over the years, Qantas said in a statement on Friday. We're proud of our diversity as well as bringing our guidelines up to date, it added. The new rules also apply to employees of Qantas budget airline Jetstar. Imogen Sterney from the Australian Services Union ASU, which had campaigned for Qantas to change its uniform policy, said the move was a big win for workers. Some of the dress code requirements were bordering on ridiculous, such as makeup style guides and a requirement for women to wear smaller watches than men. However, under the new policy, Qantas workers will still have to keep tattoos covered up. The rules also specify which items of uniform can be worn together, including requiring tights or stockings to be worn with skirts. The announcements from Qantas came after some of other airlines have relaxed their uniform policies. In September, UK-based carrier Virgin Atlantic said it would take a fluid approach to uniforms which allowed staff to choose what they wore to work no matter what their gender. However, the airline later said the policy did not apply to crew on board the England football team's flight to the World Cup in Qatar, which had been criticised for its treatment of LGBT people. At that time, Virgin said it had rolled out the measure in the UK, US and Israel, which were more accepting of non-binary identities, allowing more self-expression. In 2019, Air New Zealand ended a ban on staff having visible tattoos to allow employees to express their individuality and cultural heritage. Some New Zealanders with Maori heritage wear tattoos to mark their genealogy and heritage. HSBC reopened channels for new mortgage deals temporarily on Friday after swiftly pulling down the shutters a day earlier. The bank had said it would remove its new business, residential and buy-to-let products on Thursday, with deals available again on Monday. However, it temporarily allowed applications via brokers again for a short period on Friday. The mortgage market has been a state of some turbulence. Mortgage rates have been rising since recent data showed that inflation was not coming down as quickly as expected. There have been some predictions that the Bank of England will raise rates higher than previously thought, from their current 4.5% to as high as 5.5%. It has prompted many lenders to raise mortgage rates and also to remove deals. HSBC said on Thursday that it was withdrawing new deals to ensure that we can stay within our operational capacity and meet our customer service commitments. Brokers had expressed surprise at the spread of the withdrawal, which came initially with about 4 hours notice, only for them to be pulled after less than 3 hours. However, on Friday it opened the channel again. We remain open to new mortgage business, however, to help ensure that new customers get the best possible service, we occasionally need to limit the amount of new business we can take each day via broker services, an HSBC spokesman said. Products and rates for existing customers will still be available. Mohamed El Arain, former Deputy Director of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and President of Queen's College at Cambridge University, said HSBC had made the very dramatic move on Thursday because it judged its sustainability was threatened. People expect that the cost of mortgages will go up, and you will accelerate your demand for getting that mortgage. Why pay more money tomorrow when you can pay less today? If you're HSBC, you see lots of people turn up wanting mortgages, and you worry about two things. One is, will I make money on these mortgages? Two is, can I operationally handle these? He told BBC Radio 4's Today programme. Nationwide, Britain's biggest building society also said it would raise some of its fixed mortgage rates for new borrowing from Friday, which it said would ensure they remain sustainable. Financial data firm Moneyfacts said it has seen several mortgage providers hiking rates on deals over the past week. On Thursday, the average 2-year fixed-rate mortgage rate on the market was 5.82%, according to Moneyfacts, up from 5.49% at the start of June. Meanwhile, the average 5-year deal was 5.49%, up from 5.17% since the start of the month. Some brokers criticised the change by HSBC, with one saying lenders should give notice of a minimum of 24 hours. Riz Malik, founder and director at R3 Mortgages in Southend-on-Sea, said the move really underscored the turbulent times we're currently facing in the mortgage market. Mr. El Arain said as a result people are getting more anxious, which would probably contribute to a slowdown in economic activity. He said the only way to deal with the growing unease was for the government to tackle underlying inflationary pressures in the economy. Most central banks made the mistake in 2021 of calling inflationary transitionary, and transitory is a very dangerous word. If I tell you something is transitory, I'm telling you it's temporary, reversible, don't worry about it, don't change your behaviour. But it turned out inflation was persistent, and therefore central banks were late and society as a whole was late to adjust to high inflation. UK firms could gain access to US green funding as part of plans to boost UK and US ties announced by Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden. The pair unveiled the Atlantic Declaration to strengthen economic ties between the two countries at a White House press conference. The PM said the agreement, which falls short of a full trade deal, would bring benefits as quickly as possible. UK electrical car firms may get access to US green tax credits and subsidies. As the pair unveiled their partnership to bolster economic security, Mr. Sunak said the UK-US relationship was an indispensable alliance. The Atlantic Declaration includes commitments on easing trade barriers, close defence industry ties and a data protection deal, and steps up cooperation on AI. Asked by the political editor Chris Mason whether the New Deal was an acknowledgement of the failure to strike a broader trade agreement between the UK and US, Mr. Sunak said today's deal responds to particular challenges and opportunities we face right now. A UK-US free trade agreement was a key pledge in the Conservative Party's 2019 general election manifesto. Mr. Sunak insisted the more targeted approach of the declaration was about what can do the most benefit to our citizens as quickly as possible. Be in no doubt the economic relationship between our two countries has never been stronger, Mr. Sunak said. Plans for a full free trade agreement was abandoned months ago. On the plane ride over to Washington, Mr. Sunak said, for a while now that has not been a priority for either the US or the UK. However, Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy criticised Mr. Sunak, saying the government has left Britain's cupboards bare by not securing a trade deal. This statement shows the government has failed to deliver the comprehensive trade deal they promised in the 2019 manifesto, or to secure the ally status under the Inflation Reduction Act that is so important for the automotive sector and for the green transition. Mr. Biden said the special relationship with the UK was in real good shape, referring to their cooperation on Ukraine. Together we are providing economic and humanitarian aid and security systems to Ukraine in their fight against a brutal invasion from Russia. The Atlantic Declaration includes plans to mitigate some of the impact of the US flagship Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, on the UK economy, with proposals to remove barriers which affected trade in electrical vehicles batteries. Under current policy, the IRA provides tax credit worth $3,750 or £3,000 for each electric vehicle EV manufactured in the US, or which uses components mined, processed or manufactured in the country. The UK is already a net exporter of raw materials for EV batteries to the US, but nations without a US trade deal are barred from accessing IRA subsidies. The Atlantic Declaration commits to UK and US working on a new critical minerals agreement, which would give buyers of vehicles made using critical minerals processed, recycled or mined by UK companies access to tax credits. The declaration says the agreement would be launched after consultation with the US Congress. Japan already has a similar deal, which allows Japanese firms to also swerve export duties on minerals using in production EV batteries. The declaration also includes a commitment to a new UK-US data bridge, which would allow UK firms to transfer data freely to certified US organisations without paying a levy. Downing Street estimate the change will affect around 55,000 UK businesses, translating into £92.4 million in direct savings per year. Mr. Biden also supported Mr. Sunak's plans to set up an international summit on AI safety, which will be hosted in the UK later this year. The Prime Minister said the UK and US have always pushed the boundaries of what two countries can achieve together. So it is natural that, when faced with the greatest transformation in our economies since the Industrial Revolution, we would look to each other to build a stronger economic future together. The Atlantic Declaration sets a new standard for economic cooperation, propelling our economies into the future so we can protect our people, create jobs and grow our economies together. Both Mr. Biden and Mr. Sunak agreed to carry out work to improve the resilience of supply chains, and efforts will be stepped up to shut Vladimir Putin's Russia out of the global civil nuclear markets. The hedge fund firm founded by multi-millionaire hedge fund manager Crispin Odey is understood to be investigating by the city watchdog. The news comes as a Financial Times investigation accused Mr. Odey of sexually harassing or assaulting 13 women over 25 years. Conservative donor Mr. Odey is one of the city's most well-known figures who backed the Brexit campaign. Odey Asset Management declined to comment. The allegations made by some of the women are of a very serious sexual nature. It is understood the Financial Conduct Authority, or FCA, has been investigating Odey Asset Management for 2 years, although the details of the investigation are not clear and the FCA has declined to comment. JP Morgan, one of the banks providing services to Odey Asset Management, is thought to be reviewing its relationship with the company. In 2020, Mr. Odey was accused of assaulting a female investment banker at his London home in 1998, but it was later cleared. According to Electoral Commission figures, Crispin Odey made political donations valued at a total of £1.7 million between 2007 and 2019. Most of them were from him personally, but a few were from his company, Odey Asset Management. In some cases he listed as Robin Odey or Robin C. Odey in Electoral Commission's filings. The biggest donations, £1.3 million in total, were made to groups campaigning for Brexit around the time of the EU referendum. £355,000 of the total was given to the Conservatives, plus a donation of £10,000 directly to the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson in June 2019. He's also given small amounts to UKIP and the Christian Party. Hotel bosses have accused energy firms of failing to pass on lower prices, warning businesses could be at risk. Hotel boss Glenn Evans from Betsy Y Coed, Conwy County, pays 90p a unit on his 12-month contract, although prices have fallen to 30p a unit. Hotel owner Elise Waddy in Ledanu faces paying £200,000 more when her 3-year fixed tariff ends in July. The industry body said energy was bought in advance and changes took time to reach customers. Energy regulator Ofgem said it had written to suppliers to ask them to show flexibility, with businesses locked into fixed price contracts signed when prices were at their peak last year. Mr. Evans, operations director at the Royal Oak Hotel, said the fixed price and electricity tariffs offered in October were in shock to the system. Bill increase were about 400%, but the out-of-contract rate was even higher, so Mr. Evans felt he had to sign up for 12 months as the 6-month contract had disappeared. Mr. Evans wants UK ministers to order energy suppliers to allow firms locked into fixed peak tariffs from last year to renegotiate their contracts. He added, "We're looking for the government to recognise that there was a dysfunctional market and that between them and Ofgem they allow us access to today's prices." In April, the UK government scaled back its energy support for businesses. Mr. Evans said, having already put up prices and introduced energy-saving measures, there was not much more he could do to help pay the bills. "We need hot water for our guests, we need the fridges on, we need the kitchen ventilation, we just can't cut back on parts of the operation." Miss Waddy, who owns the Empire Hotel, said her gas bill was going to triple and her electricity would double when her contract ends in July. She likened her experience to playing poker with utility companies that have the power. Conservative MP for Aberconwy, Robin Miller, has launched a campaign on Parliament on the issue along with other MPs and hospitality trade bodies. He accused energy suppliers of anti-competitive behaviour. Energy UK, which represents energy companies, said it is important to bear in mind that when contracts have been agreed and signed, energy is purchased at market rates on behalf of the customer. Ofgem acknowledged that the costs faced by businesses locked in fixed-term deals were an enormous challenge. It added, "While as a regulator we can't unpick private contracts, we want to see commercially sensible solutions that help non-domestic customers, and we recently wrote to suppliers to ask them to show flexibility, and we will continue to press suppliers on this while we review the regulation of the non-domestic market more broadly." The UK government said it had given businesses unprecedented support and was in regular discussions with them and Ofgem to ensure customers got a fair deal. Former Cabinet Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg has warned the Conservatives against any attempt to block Boris Johnson if he seeks to stand in another parliamentary constituency. Mr. Rees-Mogg told the Mail on Sunday that to do so could plunge the party into civil war. Mr. Johnson resigned as the MP for Uxbridge and South Ruislip on Friday over the investigation into Partygate. Mr. Rees-Mogg was knighted in his resignation honours earlier that day. A Conservative Party spokesman said all potential constituency candidates, former MPs or otherwise, went through the same process. Meanwhile, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said Prime Minister Rishi Sunak had failed to end what he called the Tory chaos and called for a snap election. Mr. Johnson stepped down as an MP after he saw in advance a report by the Commons Privileges Committee investigating whether he deliberately misled the Commons over lockdown breaches in Downing Street. In an explosive 1,000-word statement on Friday evening, Mr. Johnson said, "I have received a letter from the Privileges Committee making it clear, much to my amazement, that they are determined to use proceedings against me to drive me out of Parliament." He argued the draft was riddled with inaccuracies and reeks of prejudice, calling the committee a kangaroo court, whose purpose has been to find me guilty, regardless of the facts. The committee will not confirm the sanction recommended until it publishes its report into Mr. Johnson like this week. But two sources have told the BBC that the sanction the committee recommended in the documents sent to Mr. Johnson was a suspension from the Commons, lasting more than 10 days. The 10-day period is significant because if the House of Commons approves the suspension of an MP for 10 sitting days or more, the MP then faces a recall petition in their constituency, which can lead to a by-election. In his resignation letter, the former Prime Minister left open the possibility of a return, saying he was very sad to be leaving Parliament, before adding, "at least for now." Hours earlier, one of his biggest allies, former Cabinet Minister Nadine Dorries, unexpectedly stepped down from her mid-Bedfordshire seat, and on Saturday another supporter, Nigel Adams, resigned, triggering a third by-election for the Tories. Speculation about Mr. Johnson's future in politics has subsequently included the suggestion that he could stand in another seat, although there is no indication that this is likely. Writing in the Mail on Sunday, Mr Rees-Mogg said Mr Johnson could easily get back into Parliament at the next election, and he was in pole position to return as Conservative leader if a vacancy should arise. But the former Business Secretary went on, "I would most strongly warn Conservative Party managers against any attempt to block Boris if he seeks the party nomination in another seat. Any attempt to do so would shatter our fragile party unity and plunge the Conservatives into civil war." In contrast, former Conservative Deputy Prime Minister Michael Heseltine has said Mr Johnson should not be allowed to run to be a Tory MP again. Writing in The Observer, he says, "To me it is inconceivable that in these circumstances he could stand as a Conservative Member of Parliament again." Addressing the former PM's resignation letter, Mr Heseltine writes, "Words are designed to make his audience believe whatever they want to believe. There is no anchor to any discernible truth or sense of integrity." He adds that Mr Johnson will leave Parliament and have little to do with the reality of the mess he left behind. Elsewhere in the Sunday Mirror, Mr Starmer accused Mr Sunak of failing to stand up to Mr Johnson and agreeing to hand gongs to a caste list of cronies. Rishi Sunak must finally find a backbone, call an election and let the public have their say on 13 years of Tory failure, he added. A government source rejected that and said Mr Sunak was focused on delivering what the British people wanted. Boris Johnson had to leave Downing Street last summer because a majority of his Conservative colleagues thought he was doing more harm than good. Now a committee of MPs is set to judge he didn't tell the truth. That committee is made up of mainly Tory MPs. The former PM has faced the same procedure as other MPs that have gotten themselves into trouble. And while Mr Johnson claims he has been forced out, remember he has chosen to quit before we even see the black and white of their verdict. It is also a fact that there are some Conservatives who begrudge him his success. It is also true that during his last few months, in Number 10 there were internal enemies trying to force him out. But to dress that up as a grand conspiracy is candidly a stretch. One of those who knows him best has mentioned his resignation announcement was 1,000 words that tell you everything about Johnson's mindset. It's your fault, not mine. Rather than confront what has happened or try to defend himself from the judgment that is coming, Boris Johnson made a political choice this week not to stay and fight. As ever, the line between farce and tragedy is skinny. While most of the headlines screamed of the shock, the former Prime Minister's exit from Parliament is entirely on brand. The timing on a Friday was unexpected, but to no surprise, he never much liked Parliament anyway, even though he managed to find a gong for the Commons hairdresser. The idea he would savour being a humble backbencher asking questions about cash for the local hospital or appearing at school fetes was for the birds, and if the Privileges Committee's findings are as savage as expected, he would have faced a by-election. Clues from his track record tell us there is little chance he would have fought if he hadn't been sure he could win. He pulled out the Tory leadership race in 2016 when Michael Gove's move blew up his status as front-runner. He didn't run in 2022 despite a dash back from the Caribbean and fevered claims that he had enough support. One former cabinet ally says he is more calculating than people think, and this will have been a calculation. If he thought he would win the by-election, he would stay. To win and lose does not match brand Boris. To leave like this absolutely does. The power of his personality, frankly his fame, means he leaves behind some devastating colleagues and a strand of the public who believe he has been hard done by. One former cabinet minister says the party wounded itself when it defenestrated Boris and continues to bleed. Some of his hardcore supporters left on the backbenches say his exit is a sad day for democracy, and with some justification believe his leadership is what secured their seats, particularly in parts of the country where the Tories could never have dreamt of doing well before. Some of his loyal backers do feel like he is the one great hero in a tragedy, cast aside unfairly in an epic drama, undone by those who envy his talents. His exit is arguably a tragedy for those who genuinely believed in and adored him, and there is political tragedy for the Conservative Party, which many MPs privately believed squandered a once-in-a-generation majority. 2019 gave it one of those rare chances to make radical changes to the country, and while many believe it was thrown away by mismanagement and mistakes, there was of course the unexpected horror of the COVID pandemic too. For those who deplore Boris Johnson, there is a different kind of tragedy, the damage they believe he did to the UK's economy. and the reputation, and several of those who have been close to him over the years identify a fourth element of the mess: the fact they believe it was never going to end well. In the Greek tragedies so beloved of Mr. Johnson himself, fate inevitably plays an important role. One of them says Boris is a genuine tragedy. This was all inevitable. We knew how it would play out, but we are still surprised and shocked about how dreadful it is. All our hard work passed away. So what happens next? Some MPs are actually very happy despite the colossal mess. One tells them the man baby has gone, so pleased. But allies talk up his chances of running for another seat sometime. One former senior minister tells them the question is, does he plan to get another seat or even mid-beds? The constituency his close ally and former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries has just left. Another former cabinet minister says it would be very unwise for him to run again. He has a vociferous 20% in the party who like him, but 80% don't. If he ran in a by-election, the Lib Dems would murder him. Would Party HQ even let that happen? Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has changed the personnel in charge there. One senior figure pours a bucket of freezing water over the idea, telling them Boris died today. What is not clear yet is whether, as that MP suggests, the manner of his departure could generate so much unrest. I fear there will be an election much sooner than thought. Mr. Johnson has thrown grades at number 10, not just the committee that has judged him, suggesting Mr. Sunak is not running a proper Conservative government. One former ally says the ex-PM has gone full circle, returning his political home, a hut across the water where he can now lob rocks, without any sense of responsibility or accountability, and that is ultimately very dangerous for his party and Sunak. 4 times that Boris Johnson has bounced back. In 1987, Boris Johnson was fired by The Times for falsifying a quote, but was hired the following year by the Daily Telegraph as the paper's Brussels correspondent. In 2004, he was fired as Conservative Shadow Arts Minister for lying about an affair, but was back on the front bench a year later. In 2016, he pulled out of his first bid to be Conservative leader and Prime Minister after his close friend Michael Gove launched a rival bid, but he made a surprise comeback as Foreign Secretary under eventual winner Theresa May. In 2018, he quit Miss May's cabinet in protest at her Brexit deal, only to return as leader of the party the following year, going on to win a huge majority at a general election. But if Boris Johnson is unlikely to run for Parliament again and is happy to dangle the prospect of a return, what else might he do with his time? You'll find plenty of people in Westminster chattering that he'll return to his first love, writing, but might there be something bigger? By chance his old newspaper, The Telegraph, has just come up for sale, and by chance his former editor, Will Lewis, has just been made a knight by Mr. Johnson. Is there by chance the possibility they might be part of a bid to take it over? It's been suggested to me that it is in fact something that has been discussed. It's no secret that Mr. Lewis, now Sir Will, would be keen to take it on. He advised Mr. Johnson in number 10 sometimes, and the two men worked together at the Telegraph when the former PM was its star columnist, who attracted extra subscribers each week. Going back as columnist would be one thing for Mr. Johnson, and not all that surprising, but for him to take a bigger role, as one source whispers, the editor might be the Conservatives' worst nightmare. They are told that conversations are only at the stage of ideas being scribbled down on paper. A formal sale process, let alone any decisions about actual bids, is a long way off. But they can't help but wonder what would happen if the consequences for Downing Street and the Conservatives, if their most loyal backer in the press, gave a major role to Mr. Sunak's bitter rival. Could the next twist in the Boris Johnson story be even wilder than the last? Perhaps. Some of those who have worked alongside him believe it is more likely to be Terminal Boris. A former ally says he was obviously once someone who, with exceptional skills, who came so far and did so much in the face of incredible opposition, but they say perhaps in sorrow and in anger, his career ends with him alone, a victim of his utter inability to tell the truth to anyone, including himself. Maybe he will fade into obscurity, perhaps he'll be back in Parliament one day. He might make millions speaking and writing or become Rishi Sunak's most powerful opposition, but his name is now on the list of those unprovable political what-ifs so furiously and perpetually debated by political nerds. What if Miss Thatcher hadn't been forced out? What if Tony Blair hadn't invaded Iraq? What if Boris Johnson had given a different answer in the Commons when he was first asked what happened under his roof during the COVID lockdowns? We will never know, but what we do know this weekend is that one era is over. We know Boris Johnson had huge potential to create, but also to destroy, his extraordinary majority, his reputation and the party he led too. He must now decide what to do with the power that he still retains, and his old party must decide how much attention it wants to pay. Chaos uncorked again. In his 7 months as Prime Minister, the most notable characteristic Rishi Sunak has brought to government is, relatively speaking, at least stability. But 2022, or much of it, was defined politically by a soap opera of Conservative squabbling. It didn't disappear with the arrival of Mr Sunak in number 10, but it quietened down substantially. Now it is back again. Downing Street was an observer of events on Friday. It only found out about Boris Johnson's resignation as an MP when the rest of us did. A former Prime Minister in Boris Johnson, with a lifelong knack for throwing stones and grabbing attention, doing just that. A current Prime Minister in Rishi Sunak, languishing in the opinion polls, and now confronting 2 appointments with the disgruntled electorate, courtesy of 2 people meant to be on his own side. And so, yet again, the party of government winding and wounding itself in public. I'm going to sound very 2022 by inviting you into looking at the WhatsApps, so you can hear, as they have been doing so, a sense of what Conservative MPs are saying. Boris Johnson provokes adulation and irritation, or to put it more bluntly, love and hate. Some within the party tell them he is the best Tory Prime Minister they have had since Margaret Thatcher, others as a man who should never have been allowed within a mile of Downing Street, and parallels are being drawn with former US President Donald Trump, 2 huge characters with vast charisma and even greater capacity for controversy, shaking up their parties never far from the headlines, always leaving people guessing about what they will do next. He is a medieval king, rewarding his gang, is how one senior Conservative described Mr Johnson's resignation on his list to them. He has taken unedifying to a whole new level, said another figure who has known him closely for years, and yet others are crestfallen, even heartbroken at his departure, convinced that without him they would never become MPs in the first place. So what happens next? The soap opera of squabbling starts again. As you may have guessed, Boris Johnson is not likely to vanish into obscurity. Some in the party think he is finished, others far from it. As one former cabinet minister has said, the party still doesn't feel Sunak is a winner. Even those who dislike Boris, it isn't over. And so the plates are spinning again. Boris Johnson finds himself just where he likes to be, the centre of attention, onlookers asking what on earth will he do next. The ghost of Boris Johnson haunts Rishi Sunak. It is the last thing the Prime Minister needs. The government is being accused of trying to bypass Parliament and rewrite laws on public protest by sneaky means. MPs and peers are due to debate new regulations next week, which will give the police clearer powers to stop slow-walking protest marches, blocking roads and bringing cities to a halt. The changes are designed to provide a clearer definition of what serious disruption to the life of communities means, so the police would be better able to block or impose conditions on demonstrations thought likely to cause it. The new definition would cover the cumulative impact of repeated protests and disruption and delays, with community defined as any citizen who might be affected. Taken together, these would provide a much clearer legal basis for imposing bans or restrictions. Conservative peer Lord Jackson said the government was reacting to public concern about protests by groups like Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil and slow-walking tactics, which could clog up whole city centres. The government majority in the Commons could see the order voted through by MPs on Monday, but it must also be approved in the Lords on Tuesday, and there is no government majority in that House, so it is at least technically possible that the regulation could be defeated. There's also a looming row about the way the regulations have been introduced. Peers defeated exactly the same policy when the government attempted to add it to the Public Order Bill in the Lords in February, so many are now angry that a policy they rejected has now been brought back as regulations, particularly because they are not allowed to propose changes, and by convention they never reject them. Conservative former Cabinet Minister Lord Hunt of Wirral said the government was seeking to bring the changes in a way through the back door, completely ignoring the decision the House of Lords had made in February. He will be calling for assurance that ministers would not try the same thing again. Meanwhile, the Green Party's Baroness Jones has put down a fatal motion to block the regulations. This by convention is something peers virtually never do. She said she had thought long and hard before putting her motion, but she said, "We threw this out and they're bringing it back in a sneaky way, and quite honestly it's breaking all the rules." Lord Jackson retorts that Lords would in danger of legislative overreach if it believed it knew better than the elected Commons. Their role was to revise legislation and not strike it down. For the opposition parties to defeat the government in the Lords, they need Labour on board, and Baroness Jones hopes they will allow their peers at least a free vote. But Labour Shadow Home Office Minister Lord Coker says his party is not prepared to break the normal conventions of the Lords to defeat the changes. "We certainly aren't going to vote to kill it. Our position is very clear. The government have brought it back in what we regard as an underhand way. We're going to vote against it in the Commons on Monday to lay out our position, but we're not going to fall into the elephant trap of the government using this to show us standing in the way of the democratic will of the elected government, or the elephant trap of them saying we're somehow in the pockets of Just Stop Oil." The Full Monty, about a group of unemployed Sheffield steelworkers turned strippers, was one of the best loved and highest grossing British films of the 1990s. A new streaming series shows what became of the characters. The Full Monty film opened with a shot of a derelict Sheffield factory and ended with a group of former employees hauling themselves off the scrap heap to stage a strip show in a working men's club. 26 years on, the new Disney Plus series opens with a shot of the same working men's club. It's now derelict too. A quarter of a century may have passed, but not much has changed, and despite the 1997 film's uplifting ending, it turns out that most of the six friends have only narrowly avoided dereliction themselves. They are led by lovable rogue Gaz, played by Robert Carlyle. The actor says that after years of industrial decline, when the film came out, there was a sense of optimism in the UK, thanks to New Labour, Cool Britannia and Britpop. It seems to be that things can only get better. That didn't last long though, Carlyle continues. The past 25 years have been really tough for people. 25 years, it seems, of austerity that's really chipped away at these characters and their lives. It's chipped away the infrastructure in the country as well, and I think that the show reflects that. Gaz is now a porter on a psychiatric ward, while best mate Dave, played by Mark Addy, is a caretaker at the school where his wife Jean, Leslie Sharp, is head teacher. Both fertile settings for storylines about a crumbling state. Meanwhile, Gerald, Tom Wilkinson and Horse, Paul Barber, have been left behind by modern life, and Lomper, Steve Hewson, runs a cafe called Big Baps with his husband, although that name soon gets cancelled. Only guy Hugo Spear seems to have prospered, now the privately financed pantomime villain. However, he disappears halfway through the series because the actor was himself cancelled after Disney investigated allegations of inappropriate conduct on set. The actor denied that and said he didn't believe I'd done anything wrong. The gang were joined by William Snape, who played Gaz's son Nathan in the film, and Talitha Wing, who has been cast as Gaz's daughter Destiny. At 26, Wing is the same age as the film. She familiarised herself by watching it with her grandparents. "I thought we'd find something a bit different and a bit funny," she says, "but we all actually were laughing at the same bits, so the humour and people coming together in times of hardship, I guess, is something that transcends time and generations, and it's a story that anyone can get on board with. Even though I might not have been around at the time that it was going on, I feel like you can take the message and apply it to whatever is going on today. And unfortunately, in some instances, not that much has changed." The 8-part series has been co-written by Simon Beaufoy, who was nominated for an Oscar for the original, and Alice Nutter. They have been able to put a wide range of issues in a package and still make it funny, Carlyle says. "That's genius of Simon's writing. If you don't laugh, you'll cry." With the main characters now in their mid-50s to mid-70s, the South Yorkshire set comedy drama resembles what might emerge if Ken Loach directed Last December Wine. In a 3-star review, The Telegraph's Michael Hogan said the new version firmly wears its politics on its sleeve, with mixed success. "The issues will all be too recognisable, especially to those in elected communities," he wrote. "If the optimism of the original has gone, That's the point. This is a sobering reminder of how far we have come. Collider's Chase Hutchinson described it as a slightly baggy series, elevated by the charm of flawed characters, just trying to find their way in the world. He concluded that the overall experience is a mirthful yet melancholic one worth riding along with. While having 8 episodes does make the series slightly baggy, there are major plots about a Britain's Got Talent winning dog, a lost racing pigeon and a job centre siege. It does provide more time for characters like Gian. In the 90 minutes that was the film, naturally and rightly, the story had to be about that group of men who were all trying to live with being made redundant, Sharp says. What's fantastic about revisiting is that instead of having 90 minutes, you've got 8 hours to explore in detail what has happened subsequently to all those characters, and yes, that includes a lot of really vibrant, whip-smart women, young and older. So I think it's great that the original film, which was male-centric, is now being ameliorated by the presence of some really interesting older and younger women. While revisiting a beloved film is a surefire way to attract eyeballs, it also comes with expectations. Revisiting anything can be fraught with complications, Sharp accepts, but because the film has been so loved and because Simon obviously wanted to continue telling the story of those characters, it felt like it was an enormous opportunity. One plotline that gets relatively little screen time is stripping. Well, nobody really needs to see that, smiles Addy. It's about so much more. That was our starting block, and it's interesting to see where these characters have gone from there. Much of the film's appeal, though, came from the idea of stripping, if not the act itself, as a clever way to give the men a liberating and cheeky opportunity to shed society's limitations and regain control of their lives. Its feel-good power was such that the film has spawned a number of celebrity charity spin-offs. See the full Monty on Ice, as well as inspiring amateur fundraisers. There are still men who get together and do the Full Monty for charity, Carnell notes, and I think that's an amazing thing. If the Full Monty has done nothing else, and it was only that, then it is worth it. The actor originally feared the film would bomb because it was such a tough shoot. You go home at night thinking, what is this? Is this funny? Is this anything? He says. I thought this is never going to work, of course. The finished article proved me wrong. This time, filming was relatively easy, he says. It really was beautiful to see the guys again, because you look in each other's faces and you see life, you know, in the lines in their face, and that was lovely. And the thing is, the Full Monty has been like a huge, big, warm shadow that's followed me my whole career. There's only about 4 or 5 other people in the world that would understand that, and it's those guys. It was fantastic to be back doing all that again. The Full Monty is on Disney Plus from Wednesday the 14th of June. She's the granddaughter of Elvis and the star of one of the most talked about series of the year, Daisy Jones and the Six. But when it came to directing, actress Riley Keough says that she and her co-director, British-Australian Gina Gammell, struggled to get War Pony, their first film, funded. There's lots of talk and I think there's some great effort, but I don't know if the people who are making those decisions are totally there yet, she says. I don't know if some have caught up on the concepts that women can be in positions of power and can be trusted. War Pony is the story of 2 young Native American men trying to find their place in the world that doesn't offer them much opportunity, and was filmed on Pine Ridge Reservation, the lands of the Oglala Lakota in South Dakota, using a largely local cast and first-time actors. It won the Camera d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival last year, the prize given by the festival to a Best Debut Feature Film, but at points Keough wondered if the film would be completed. You have 2 females making their first feature with a completely indigenous cast of quote-unquote no value in terms of the marketplace and no movie stars, Keough explains. We see this a lot because Gina and I have a production company and we see the money that's given to men versus women, first-time filmmaker or not, and it's really an issue still. At the end of the day, we had wonderful financiers who understood the vision and came together and supported us, but prior to that it was really depressing, you know. Gammell's added, we'd be finishing a week of shooting and we were making phone calls trying to get the next week of shooting paid for. And we were really lucky that we got through it. And we only just managed to get through it. It was incredibly tough. The film is now getting released in the UK as well as elsewhere in Europe and the USA with an overall score of 91% on movie review site Rotten Tomatoes, with Empire calling it restrained but promising stuff from Keough and Gammell, who exhibit strong world building and lightness of filmmaking touch. Koo, who has suffered personal losses this year with the death in January of her mother, Lisa Marie Presley, who suffered a cardiac arrest at the age of 54, 3 years after her son Benjamin, Koo's brother, died. Koo and her grandmother Priscilla Presley reached a settlement over Presley's estate in May. She started acting as a teenager with her first prominent role in 2010's The Runaways, a Joan Jett biopic starring Kristen Stewart and Dakota Fanning. She also starred in 2015's Mad Max Fury Road. Koo's profile as an actress has risen further with the release of Daisy Jones and the Six, based on a novel set in the LA music scene of the 1970s. But she says she always wanted to direct and write as well. With acting, I just got really lucky, she says. I booked my first audition and lit a fire under me to continue. But had I had the opportunity at the age of 18 to direct, maybe it would have gone in a different direction. I love writing too, she adds. I'll write for anyone who would have me if they don't have deadlines. I'm a bit of a stream of consciousness kind of gal. Warpony started during a break in filming 2016's American Honey, an independent film by British director Andrea Arnold, which Koo starred in. While shooting in South Dakota, she met two extras in the movie, Bill Reddy and Franklin Sue Bob. Koo and Gamel later went on to visit them at their home on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and a friendship developed before the idea of making a film. Reddy and Sue Bob are credited as co-writers, and the narrative of Warpony is based upon their life experiences. They are the storytellers here, and Riley and I think, are the vessels that help them capture the story. But it's very much their story, Gamel says. Franklin Ciru Bob believes that unlike other creative projects suggested to Native Americans living on Pine Ridge Reservation, he believed this one was authentic. A lot of things go through our reservation, just like this scenario, and it's mainly one-sided. They came, they saw, they exploited it, they left, and this wasn't the case. People will go, and the difference is Riley and Gina came back. They gave us their word, and they consistently came back. These are my two friends, it's not just a work relationship, he explains. Native Americans are starting to come trendy in film, but this is different too, because even when we started this film years ago, we had no idea it would even come to this point. Warpony openly shows the poverty and lack of opportunity many people living on a reservation experience, which Koo condemns as a result of the indigenous people of our country having to live like a capitalist. They have to live in non-traditional ways in order to fit into their own country, she says. One of the things Gina and I admired most about these boys is how creative they have to be. There's not much job opportunity, they have to be creative and hustle and come up with new ideas just to survive. Then there's just their resilience and ability to live this way that's also very traumatic and chaotic. You don't get this in school in America unless you've raised in an area that's in close proximity to a reservation, but you don't really know where indigenous people are in the country, what their life looks like. It's so far removed and isolated on purpose. It's the broken ideals of that American dream that I think affects them profoundly, Gamel adds. After Warpony, Koo says that she and Gamel want to direct together again, but she explains that nothing yet has totally grabbed us. I think that for us, the standard Warpony set in terms of how much we care about who we collaborate with, it needs to grab us in the same way emotionally. We've had such a profound collaboration, I think it's hard to go backwards from that. Warpony opens in UK and Irish cinemas on 9th of June 2023. Going to a music festival used to be a staple of teenagers' summers. Spending a weekend seeing your favourite bands is a great way to celebrate or forget end-of-year exams. But the COVID pandemic and the cost of living crisis means many teens may have never been to a festival. That's something a new crowdfunding scheme, which will use the cash to offer a chance at £18 tickets, wants to change. If I can raise the money. If your 18th birthday lands between the 1st of September 2019 and August 31st, 2023, you can get on the waiting list for events. They run by the Association of Independent Festivals, the people offering a limited run of discount tickets to some of its events. Boss John Roston says they want to make it really affordable to get people out to their first festival. He believes older audiences have been able to keep coming thanks to payment plans, which teenagers are less likely to do. Ticket prices have been going up. Glastonbury cost £340 this year, £75 more than when they last went on sale in 2019. I think the crunch on young people is perhaps a bit harder, says John. They have less money coming in and they have all the costs of being a young person. So it is really affecting them, missing out on events and missing out on places to go and things to do. EJ is a big live music fan who's experienced the feeling of missing out. The 17-year-old who uses they them pronouns has never been to a festival as they can't afford it. They're expensive, they explain. I'm a student and I don't have that kind of money to be spending, but I would love to go to a festival if I could. EJ says they have had to spend less on food spending to afford gig tickets and would have to make unrealistic savings on things like travelling to college to afford a festival. So they think the scheme is a great idea. But EJ thinks more could be done to make festivals accessible if you're on a tight budget, like food and drink, which are often far more expensive than they would be in a shop. My friend said he bought a Red Bull last year and it was £5. That is ridiculous. I feel like if they could lower that, that would make it much easier for a lot of people. But festivals have also been feeling a squeeze, according to Michael Lane. He's an organiser of 110 Above Festival. It's signed up to the £18 ticket scheme. Michael says his event has done everything we can to keep prices down as much as possible, even though their supply chain costs have increased. He says their tickets have seen a marginal increase this year, but without the rise they'd go out of business. Specifically for independent festivals, they're very much a passion project, so they're not there to really make a lot of money, he says. We have people, of course, to feed at home and so forth, so it's an absolute necessity that the prices do go up. Of course, just as little as we can possibly do so. Currently, the £18 scheme includes festivals like Kendal Calling and NASS, but John says the association has been in touch with some larger events to try and get them on board. EJ hopes more big festivals get behind discount tickets. You should just help the people that want to come to see the music and let them enjoy the music. I don't know anyone that doesn't enjoy live music. Giving people the opportunity to go to a festival, I feel like that's so great. Okay, so that's the end of the live stream for today. If you guys really enjoyed it, I hope you did. Please make sure to watch some of the other videos I've got on the YouTube channel. There are plenty of different videos based on different topics, from food to politics. And throughout the series, as I go through my multiple vids, I will be making those into playlists so you can watch what is tailored and interesting to you. Thank you very much and see you next time.